Welcome to a gentle exploration of one of life's deepest mysteries. What does orgasm truly feel like? In this calm, science-based journey, we explore the body, brain, and emotions, weaving together biology, psychology, intimacy, and afterglow. Relax as we unfold the unspeakable secret. An experience science maps but language can never fully capture. There are some questions that human beings can ask easily, out loud with no hesitation. We can ask what the weather will be, how a recipe works, why stars shine in the night sky. But then there are the quieter questions, the ones that linger in the back of the mind, the ones that are whispered rather than spoken boldly. Among them is one that nearly everyone has thought at some point. What does orgasm actually feel like? People know it from experience, yet when pressed to describe it, the answers stumble. Words are clumsy, science feels clinical, metaphors strain under the weight of the subject. Orgasm is both one of the most universal human experiences and one of the most difficult to explain. Part of the challenge lies in language itself. Human vocabulary was designed to capture objects, actions, and simple sensations. We can say cold or hot, heavy or light, sharp or dull. But orgasm is not a single sensation. It is a cascade, a crescendo, a symphony of signals firing all at once, layered with emotion, context, and memory. To describe it is to try to pin a thunderstorm with a single word, or to capture a symphony with one note. The complexity overwhelms the simplicity of language. This is why people often resort to metaphors: fireworks, waves, explosions, melting, release. Each metaphor captures a fragment of truth, but never the whole. Science tries to answer the question with measurement. Electrodes can track brain activity, sensors can record muscle contractions, hormone levels can be sampled in blood. Research shows that during orgasm, pelvic muscles contract rhythmically, heart rate spikes, dopamine floods reward circuits, oxytocin surges to deepen bonding, and the prefrontal cortex, our seat of judgment, goes quiet. These details are accurate, even illuminating, but they do not tell us what it feels like to surrender into that moment. Science can describe what happens, but not what it is like. The subjective reality, the lived experience, is always beyond the scope of numbers. Another reason the question is difficult is that orgasm is not the same for everyone. For some, it is sharp and sudden, an explosive peak. For others, it is rolling and sustained, like waves breaking one after another. Some feel it localized in the genitals, while others describe it as spreading through the body in tingles, shivers, or heat. The differences are not just biological, but psychological and cultural. Stress, trust, context, and imagination all shape how it feels. What one person remembers as bliss, another may remember as fleeting. This variability means that when people try to answer the question, they are describing not a universal truth, but their own corner of a vast landscape. The whispering nature of the question also reveals the social layers that surround sexuality. For centuries, many cultures treated orgasm as something secretive, shameful, or inappropriate to discuss. Even in modern societies that celebrate openness, many people still hesitate to speak plainly about it. This silence makes it harder to compare experiences, to build a shared vocabulary. People know what it feels like for themselves, but do not always hear others' descriptions, and so the mystery deepens. It is like a secret everyone knows but no one fully articulates. Psychology adds another layer of complexity. Orgasm is not just sensation, it is also release. The tension that builds during arousal, muscles tightening, breath shortening, heart racing, suddenly breaks. The body lets go in rhythmic contractions, while the brain releases a chemical flood. That contrast between strain and surrender, between anticipation and climax, is central to the experience. It is why people describe it as relief, as melting, as breaking through. Without the build-up, the release would not feel the same. But to put that dynamic into words is hard, because it is not only physical, but emotional. It is vulnerability, trust, letting go of control. Language struggles to hold both physiology and feeling in the same breath. Philosophers and poets have long tried to answer the question, and their attempts show both the allure and the limitation of words. Some call orgasm the little death, a phrase that captures the sense of losing self, of dissolving into sensation. Others compare it to music reaching crescendo or to storms breaking. These images evoke intensity, but they cannot transmit the lived reality. To ask someone who has never experienced orgasm what it feels like is like trying to explain color to someone who has only ever known black and white. Description can gesture toward the truth, but never fully deliver it. The brain's role in this mystery is profound. Climax is not just a reflex of muscles and nerves, but an altered state of consciousness. During orgasm, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and self-awareness, shuts down. Time seems to disappear. The sense of self dissolves into sensation. This is why orgasm is often described as transcendent or spiritual, as if it lifts people out of ordinary reality. Science can measure the cortical shutdown, but it cannot measure the sense of timelessness, the feeling of being beyond words. That lived transformation is the essence of the experience and also the reason it defies description. Another reason orgasm is hard to describe is that it blends the physical with the emotional. The contraction of muscles is real, the rush of hormones is real, but the meaning attached to those sensations changes everything. With a trusted partner, orgasm may feel like intimacy, bonding, even love. Alone, it may feel like release or self-discovery. In some contexts, it may carry guilt or sadness. In others, pure joy. The same biology produces different meanings depending on context. This fusion of body and story makes orgasm not just a reflex, but an experience, and experiences resist easy definition. The whisper of the question, "What does orgasm feel like?" reminds us that some parts of human life are both universal and ineffable. Everyone who has experienced it knows, but no one can quite say. Science provides data, poetry provides metaphor, culture provides silence or story, but the reality always remains just beyond words. It is this tension between knowing and not being able to say that gives the question its power. Reflecting on this mystery reveals something deeper about pleasure itself. Orgasm is not only the climax of arousal, but the climax of language's limits. It shows us that there are experiences too rich to capture, too subjective to pin down. It reminds us that biology and psychology weave together into something larger, something that resists reduction. In that way, orgasm is not just a sexual event, but a philosophical one, a reminder that human life is lived in moments that exceed description. To whisper the question is to admit curiosity, to recognize the gap between science and story. It is to acknowledge that even in a world where every nerve can be mapped and every hormone measured, some experiences remain partly hidden. Orgasm feels like tension and release, like fire and wave, like losing and finding yourself. But none of these words can capture it fully. What it truly feels like is something only the body and mind together can know, and only in the moment itself. The whisper is not a failure of language, but an invitation to experience. The answer is not found in words, but in life lived, in closeness, in trust, in the quiet miracle of pleasure itself. Before the storm of climax, before the contractions, the rush and the surrender, there is always the beginning. That beginning is not sudden, but gradual, like the strike of a match that flares into flame. It is the first spark of arousal, the moment when nerves awaken and the body begins to prime itself for what may come. Asking what orgasm feels like is incomplete without understanding this spark, because climax does not arrive in isolation. It is built on foundations laid in anticipation, in the tingling of skin, in the warmth spreading through blood, in the quickening of breath long before release. The human nervous system is exquisitely sensitive to touch, sight, sound, smell, and imagination. In arousal, these inputs converge, activating pathways that prepare the body. A gentle brush of skin, a glance that lingers, a voice lowered to a whisper. Each stimulus triggers sensory receptors that send signals through nerves into the spinal cord and brain. The skin is alive with mechanoreceptors tuned to pressure, stretch, vibration, and temperature. Pacinian corpuscles detect vibrations. Meissner's corpuscles respond to light touch. Free nerve endings sense warmth. Each message travels along electrical currents, and the brain begins weaving them into a picture of desire. The first spark often registers as tingling. This tingling is not imagined, but the literal firing of nerve endings, releasing neurotransmitters that heighten sensitivity. Blood vessels dilate under the influence of nitric oxide, increasing flow to genital tissues, lips, and skin. The result is a warmth that spreads subtly, like embers beginning to glow. For some, it feels like heat building in the lower body. For others, it spreads across chest, neck, or even fingertips. The body, in this stage, is not yet overwhelmed, but quietly preparing, priming tissues with blood, flooding them with oxygen, and making every touch feel sharper. Anticipation magnifies this process. The brain's reward system does not wait for climax to release dopamine. It begins surging early in response to cues of possibility. Dopamine is a chemical of pursuit, rewarding not only the prize but the chase itself. When arousal begins, dopamine release narrows focus, heightens craving, and makes every cue, an image, a sound, a scent, feel magnetic. The body tingles because the brain is telling it that something important is happening. Anticipation is the fuel of arousal, ensuring that even before the peak, the journey feels rewarding. Physiologically, the first spark sets in motion the arousal phase described by Masters and Johnson in their classic studies of human sexuality. In this phase, blood fills erectile tissues, causing swelling, engorgement, and increased sensitivity. In men, the penis enlarges. In women, the clitoris and labia swell, and vaginal lubrication begins. But beyond genital changes, the entire body participates. Nipples harden, skin may flush with a rosy hue known as the sex flush, heart rate rises, and breathing deepens. These are not just byproducts but essential steps in priming the body for orgasm. Without the preparation, climax would not arrive with such force. What is striking about the first spark is how subjective it feels. Some describe it as warmth pooling low in the belly, others as electricity darting across the skin, others still as a floating lightness in the chest. These metaphors capture the diversity of experience, but all share the theme of intensification. The body moves from neutral to heightened, from everyday sensation to charged sensation. The same touch that might feel ordinary in another context suddenly feels amplified, significant, impossible to ignore. This shift is the essence of arousal, and it is what makes orgasm possible. Psychology deepens the spark further. The mind is not passive, but active in creating arousal. Imagination, fantasy, and memory can ignite nerves without a single touch. The brain's ability to simulate sensation is powerful. Images recalled in the mind can trigger the same pathways as stimuli received through the senses. This is why arousal can begin in solitude, through thought alone. Anticipation, in this case, is not about what is happening, but about what could happen. The spark, then, is not only in the body, but in the mind's ability to build expectation. Hormones also play their part. Testosterone, present in both men and women, primes the brain for desire, making cues of arousal more noticeable and rewarding. Estrogen increases blood flow and sensitivity, amplifying the warmth and tingling. Progesterone can modulate the process, either dampening or enhancing it depending on timing. Together, these hormones create a chemical environment in which the nervous system is more responsive, the brain more focused, the body more prepared. The spark is not random. It is the result of biology aligning itself for pleasure. Even culture and memory shape how the spark feels. Experiences from the past, associations learned over time, and beliefs about sex all influence how arousal begins. A scent associated with intimacy may trigger tingling because it recalls closeness. A song may stir warmth because it has been paired with memory. The first spark is never purely physical, it is layered with meaning. This is why arousal can feel different in different contexts. With trust, it may feel expansive and safe. With fear, it may feel muted or absent. The nervous system is biological, but its responses are shaped by the stories carried in the mind. The importance of the first spark cannot be overstated. Orgasm is often described as explosive, but that explosion cannot occur without the slow build of heat. The tingling and warmth of arousal prime the muscles, vessels, and brain. They create a crescendo, each moment building toward the peak. Without this stage, climax would be abrupt and shallow. With it, climax is profound, amplified by the anticipation that preceded it. The spark is the seed from which the fire grows. The universality of the spark is another of its mysteries. Across cultures, genders, and ages, people describe the same progression: tingling, warmth, quickening breath, rising tension. Yet the specifics are deeply personal. The same nerves fire, the same hormones flow, the same brain regions activate, but the subjective reality is unique. This is why no two people describe arousal in exactly the same way. Each nervous system is tuned by biology and experience, making the spark a universal phenomenon felt in countless individual ways. Reflecting on this process reveals why describing orgasm is so hard. The spark itself already blends biology and psychology in ways that language cannot fully capture. It is tingling, but not only tingling, warmth, but not only warmth, anticipation, but not only anticipation. It is the layering of all three, amplified by context, memory, and trust. To describe it is to speak in fragments, knowing that the whole can never be conveyed. And yet, even in fragments, the spark is recognizable, a shared experience whispered across humanity. Sex feels so good not only at the peak but in the build-up, in the spark that ignites everything else. The tingling nerves, the warmth of blood, the quickening of breath, the flood of dopamine, these are not preludes, but part of the pleasure itself. They remind us that orgasm is not only an event, but a journey, that anticipation is as rewarding as release, that the first spark is as essential as the final flame. To ask what orgasm feels like is to begin here, in the whisper of nerves and the glow of anticipation, in the moment when the body shifts from ordinary sensation into extraordinary possibility. The spark is where ecstasy begins. When arousal deepens beyond the first spark, the body enters a state of transformation that is impossible to ignore. Blood flows faster, breath quickens, skin flushes, and every nerve seems to wake. This stage of sexual experience is often described as overwhelming anticipation, a sense that the body is charging itself for release. The rush of blood and breath is more than a backdrop to climax. It is a central part of what orgasm feels like, because without it, the peak could never rise so high. It is the amplification, the swelling, the quickening that makes the final surge possible. The heart is the first to announce this change. Normally it beats at a steady pace, calm and unnoticed. But during arousal, sympathetic nerves signal the heart to pump faster and harder. Heart rate rises, sometimes doubling from resting levels. Each beat pushes more blood into the arteries, sending warmth to the skin and engorgement to erectile tissues. The thrum of the pulse becomes noticeable in the chest, in the neck, in the very core of the body. Some describe it as pounding, others as fluttering, but all agree it feels like life itself is speeding up. The heart is not only keeping pace with desire, it is driving it forward. Breathing follows suit. Slow, steady breaths give way to deeper, faster inhalations. Oxygen demand increases as muscles tense and blood surges. The diaphragm moves rapidly, lungs expanding wider, chest rising and falling in rhythm with excitement. For many, this shift in breath is one of the first unmistakable signs that arousal has taken hold. Breath comes in gasps, sighs or shudders, and the sound itself can heighten the experience. The rhythm of breathing mirrors the rhythm of touch, creating feedback between body and mind. As breath quickens, anticipation grows. As anticipation grows, breath quickens further. It is a loop, pulling the body closer to climax. The rush of blood has visible effects on the body. Skin may flush with a rosy hue, especially on the chest, face, or thighs. This sex flush is caused by vasodilation, blood vessels widening to carry more flow. For some, the flush is faint. For others, it spreads dramatically, painting the body in color. Genital tissues swell noticeably, with clitoral and penile engorgement creating hypersensitivity. The swelling is not subtle. It changes sensation profoundly. Areas that might normally feel only mild touch now respond with electric intensity. Every nerve ending in engorged tissue is closer to the surface, bathed in blood, primed for stimulation. This is why the body feels transformed, why touch feels sharper, why anticipation builds to near urgency. Inside, the chemistry of arousal reinforces these sensations. Nitric oxide, a signaling molecule, relaxes smooth muscles in blood vessels, allowing more blood to flow into erectile tissues. In men, the corpora cavernosa fill, creating erection. In women, the clitoris, labia, and vaginal walls swell with blood, while Bartholin's glands increase lubrication. These processes are not only reproductive, they are sensory. Swelling heightens sensitivity, making every touch magnified. The body is literally rewired in real time, with nerves firing more frequently and more intensely as tissues engorge. The physical reality of swelling translates directly into subjective intensity. This rush of blood also heightens awareness beyond the genitals. Nipples harden as erectile tissue responds to sympathetic activation, and for many, sensitivity increases dramatically in this area. Fingers, lips, and ears may feel more receptive to touch. Some describe a tingling spread across the skin, as if the body itself is alive with current. This whole-body responsiveness is why sex can feel immersive rather than localized. Blood and breath prepare not just one region, but the entire system for pleasure. The quickening pulse and swelling are mirrored in the brain. As heart and lungs accelerate, the limbic system activates, releasing dopamine to reward pursuit and oxytocin to deepen trust. The hypothalamus, a tiny region with outsized influence, signals hormonal changes that reinforce arousal. The insula, which processes body awareness, lights up, making every sensation more vivid. This is why swelling does not just feel physical, it feels emotional, urgent, meaningful. The body is not only preparing, the mind is interpreting, layering significance onto every throb of pulse, every rush of breath. Anticipation sharpens further in this stage. The point of no return is still ahead, but the body already feels like it is climbing a steep incline. Muscles tighten involuntarily, thighs clenching, abdomen flexing, shoulders tensing. The rush of blood delivers oxygen to these muscles, preparing them for the contractions of climax. At the same time, pelvic floor muscles begin subtle, unconscious tightening. This prelude sets the stage for the rhythmic contractions of orgasm itself. Every fiber of the body is bracing, winding tighter, coiled for release. Subjectively, people describe this stage in many ways. Some feel heat radiating outward, as if the body is burning gently from within. Others describe it as pressure building, a sense of fullness, swelling that demands resolution. Some feel lightheaded, as if breath and blood have shifted perception. For many, the body feels both heavy and light, weighted by tension, yet floating in anticipation. These metaphors reflect the difficulty of putting sensation into words, but they all point to the same truth. The rush of blood and breath is not subtle, but overwhelming, a tidal pull toward climax. From an evolutionary perspective, this stage makes sense. By making arousal feel urgent and pleasurable, the body ensures that the act is pursued with intensity and completed with commitment. The rush of blood guarantees that tissues are primed for reproduction, but the subjective feeling, swelling, heat, quickened pulse, ensures that the act feels irresistible. Pleasure was evolution's trick to make survival certain. The fact that the build-up itself feels rewarding shows how deeply the system is designed to succeed. Even without climax, the rush of blood and breath can feel satisfying, a reward in itself. Culturally, this stage has been described in countless ways. Poets call it longing, ache, or hunger. Scientists call it vasocongestion and increased sympathetic activation. Lovers call it anticipation, the unbearable waiting that is also unbearably sweet. All these words circle the truth. The body, through swelling and breath, is caught in a state of urgency that is both pleasure and promise. It is the bridge between desire and climax, the stage that makes the finale possible. Clinically, disruptions in this stage can reveal how important it is. Conditions that limit blood flow, such as cardiovascular disease or diabetes, can reduce arousal and make climax harder to reach. Medications that blunt nervous system activation can mute sensitivity. Stress, by constricting blood vessels through cortisol, can suppress swelling and lubrication. These challenges show that the rush of blood and breath is not optional, but essential. Without it, pleasure is diminished and orgasm becomes elusive. Restoring healthy circulation and relaxation often restores sexual satisfaction, proving how foundational this stage is to the entire experience. Reflecting on your own experiences, you may recognize this stage clearly. The racing heart, the deepened breath, the swelling warmth. It is the unmistakable signal that climax is approaching. It is not just background noise, but the body's announcement that pleasure has taken hold. The rush of blood and breath is a transformation, shifting the body from everyday physiology into extraordinary intensity. It is the bridge between spark and peak, the climb that makes the summit breathtaking. Sex feels so good not only because of the final explosion, but because of this climb. The pounding heart, the heat of blood, the gasp of breath, the tingling of skin, all are part of the pleasure. They are not preludes, but integral notes in the symphony. To ask what orgasm feels like is to recognize that it feels not only like climax, but like the journey there, the rush of blood and breath that makes release inevitable and unforgettable. It is the anticipation made physical, the body's quickening pulse carrying you toward the mystery of release. The story of orgasm is not one sudden leap from calm to climax, but a steady climb, step by step, as the body gathers momentum. After the spark of arousal and the rush of blood and breath, there comes a stage that feels like being suspended on the edge of something immense. Muscles grow taut, breath grows shallow, and every nerve hums with expectation. This is the stage of tension rising, the tightening before the release, the building storm before the break. It is a paradoxical moment, exhilarating and frustrating, charged with promise yet heavy with restraint. It is here that the body enters what scientists call the plateau phase, and what most people recognize as the delicious, almost unbearable wait before the point of no return. Physiologically, the body is shifting into high gear. Muscles across the body begin to contract involuntarily, even those not directly involved in sexual activity. The pelvic floor tightens, thighs press together or brace apart, abdominal muscles harden, shoulders and hands clench. This tension is not random. It is the nervous system recruiting every part of the body into readiness. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is firing strongly now, the same system that prepares the body for fight or flight. But here, instead of danger, it is preparing for ecstasy. Blood pressure climbs, heart rate soars, and sweat begins to bead on the skin. The body is literally wound tight, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. The shallowness of breath in this stage is not weakness, but preparation. As oxygen demand skyrockets, breathing becomes rapid, sometimes gasping. The diaphragm pumps faster, but each breath is shorter, squeezed by the tightening of chest and abdominal muscles. This quickened respiration feeds oxygen to tissues already working at maximum demand. The brain interprets this shift in breathing as urgency, heightening arousal further. For many, the shallowness of breath is one of the strongest signals that climax is close. The body is panting as if chasing something, racing toward an unseen finish line. Nerves in this stage are firing at extraordinary rates. Genital tissues, already swollen with blood, now transmit intense, unrelenting signals to the spinal cord and brain. The pudendal nerve, dorsal nerve of the clitoris, and cavernous nerves of the penis are lit like live wires, delivering information about pressure, vibration, and stretch. But more than just the genitals are involved. Skin across the body becomes hypersensitive, touch amplified by the heightened state of arousal. Even the lightest stroke can feel electric. This is why partners often describe this stage as one where every sensation feels magnified, as if the volume on the body has been turned up to maximum. In the brain, the rising tension is reflected in chemistry. Dopamine levels remain high, urging pursuit and focus. Oxytocin rises steadily, increasing bonding and trust. Endorphins, natural opioids, are released to dull any perception of discomfort, allowing the body to push further into intensity without recoiling. The hypothalamus signals for more hormonal support, and adrenaline adds to the rush. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that normally governs self-control, is already dimming, loosening the sense of restraint. People often describe this stage as a sense of surrender creeping in, of losing the ability to think clearly, of being swept by instinct. It is not an illusion, but a real neurological shift. The point of no return begins here, a threshold that once crossed cannot be reversed. In men, this is known as the emission stage, when semen collects in the urethral bulb and ejaculation becomes inevitable. In women, it is more diffuse, but many describe a moment when the body is committed, when climax feels unstoppable. This point is the culmination of muscle tension, nerve firing, and brain chemistry. It is the line between control and inevitability, and crossing it is one of the most distinctive sensations in human experience. To describe it is difficult. People call it teetering, tipping, falling over the edge. Science can track the reflexes, but the subjective sense of inevitability remains one of the greatest mysteries of orgasm. Psychologically, the rising tension is both pleasurable and challenging. Some people savor it, stretching it out, enjoying the ache of anticipation. Others find it almost unbearable, rushing toward release as soon as possible. The difference lies partly in mindset and partly in body chemistry. Dopamine thrives on anticipation, so those who enjoy the build-up are riding the dopamine wave. Those who crave resolution are seeking the endorphin and oxytocin flood that follows climax. Both are natural responses, two sides of the same evolutionary coin. From an evolutionary perspective, this rising tension ensures that climax will not be abandoned halfway. By making the build-up feel urgent, even uncomfortable, the body guarantees follow-through. Pleasure is strongest at the peak, but the frustration of tension ensures that the organism does not stop short. This mechanism increased reproductive success, ensuring that mating behaviors continued until completion, The fact that the rising tension is pleasurable enough to draw people forward, yet pressing enough to demand resolution, shows the elegant balanced nature built into sexuality. Subjective descriptions of this stage vary widely, but common themes appear. People describe it as heat rising, pressure building, a knot tightening in the belly, a coiling of energy. Some feel it as trembling, others as rigidity, others as a tingling spread. Many compare it to being on the brink of sneezing, that moment of suspended inevitability before release, but magnified across the body and magnified in intensity. Others compare it to climbing a roller coaster, the clack of the track pulling upward, knowing the plunge is imminent. These metaphors are imperfect, but they capture the sense of rising tension that defines this stage. The cultural imagination has long celebrated this moment. Poets and writers describe longing, ache, and anticipation as central to desire. Art depicts figures caught between restraint and surrender, bodies straining against invisible forces. These depictions reflect a truth. The tension is not only physical but emotional. It is the yearning that makes release so meaningful. Without the ache, the climax would be less powerful. The build-up is not wasted time, but part of the pleasure itself. Clinical science confirms the importance of muscle tension. Electromyography studies show sharp increases in pelvic floor activity during the plateau phase, preparing for orgasmic contractions. Blood pressure readings climb, sometimes to levels comparable with intense exercise. Pulse rates can hit 160 beats per minute or more. Sweat increases, skin conductivity changes, and brain scans reveal widespread activation across sensory and motor regions. This stage is not subtle, it is a full-body mobilization. To call it tension is accurate, but it is also readiness, a gathering storm that is about to break. The frustration that can come with this stage is also part of the story. When release is delayed too long, people may experience discomfort, sometimes called blue balls in men or pelvic congestion in women. This occurs because blood remains trapped in engorged tissues and muscles stay clenched without relief. The ache is real, a reminder that tension is meant to resolve in climax. But even without climax, the body eventually disperses the blood and relaxes the muscles. This shows that while orgasm is not strictly required, the design of tension rising is to push toward completion. The ache ensures pursuit, but the body can reset if necessary. Reflecting on this stage reveals why orgasm feels so extraordinary. The peak is only as powerful as the climb. The swelling of blood, the quickened breath, the tightening of muscles, these are the foundation of ecstasy. Without them, climax would be muted, like a song without crescendo. With them, climax feels explosive, like resolution after unbearable anticipation. Tension rising is not just the middle of the process. It is the essence of the build-up, the reason release feels like surrender. Sex feels so good because it is not only about the final moment, but about this climb. The shallow breath, the racing heart, the clenched muscles, the sense of inevitability. These are pleasures in their own right. They make climax feel not only like release, but like triumph, the culmination of a journey the body and mind take together. To ask what orgasm feels like is to recognize that it feels like this too. The rising tension, the teetering edge, the suspended second before falling into release. It is the ache that becomes ecstasy, the tightening that makes the letting go unforgettable. At the summit of the climb, after the sparks of arousal, the rush of blood and breath, and the mounting tension that feels almost unbearable, the body finally tips into release. This is the peak, the moment when climax arrives and everything changes in a matter of seconds. It is sudden, inevitable, overwhelming, and nearly impossible to capture in words. Science can describe muscle contractions, heat, and electrical activity in the brain, but none of that matches the subjective experience of being swept away. To ask what orgasm feels like is to focus here, on the convergence of heat, pressure, and rhythm that explodes into climax. The most defining feature of orgasm is contraction. In women, the pelvic floor, uterus, and vaginal walls pulse rhythmically, usually at intervals of less than a second. In men, the pelvic floor, prostate, and muscles around the urethra contract in coordinated bursts, often coupled with ejaculation. These contractions are involuntary. The body seizes them from conscious control. People may tense or relax intentionally earlier in the process, but once orgasm begins, the contractions happen automatically, pulsing through the core of the body. They feel like waves or surges, crashing and then receding, repeating until the climax gradually fades. Each contraction is both a physical event and a sensory rush, sending information up the spinal cord to the brain and layering intensity upon intensity. Heat is another hallmark, as blood surges through engorged tissues, as muscles fire in bursts, as heart and lungs race, the body floods with warmth. For some, this warmth pools in the pelvis and chest, glowing from within. For others, it radiates outward, spreading into arms, legs, even fingertips. A sex flush, rosy patches across the skin, may bloom suddenly as blood vessels dilate further. Sweat beads on the forehead, trickles down the spine, adding to the sense that the body is burning with energy. This heat is not simply physical temperature, but the subjective impression of being lit from inside, as if the body itself were aflame. It is why so many metaphors for orgasm involve fire, light, or explosion. The surges of sensation are what make climax unforgettable. Before orgasm, touch feels heightened, but at the peak, it feels transcendent, as if the body has surpassed its normal limits. Sensory nerves in the genitals fire in a frenzy, sending volleys of signals to the spinal cord and brain. But it is not only genital sensation that floods awareness. Many people report tingles down the spine, shivers across the skin, tremors in the limbs, or vibrations that seem to ripple through the body. The combination of muscle contraction, blood flow, and nerve firing creates a sensory overload, a blending of signals that the brain interprets as ecstasy. In the brain itself, orgasm is nothing less than a storm. Dopamine surges to its highest levels, rewarding the pursuit and signaling pure pleasure. Oxytocin spikes, intensifying feelings of bonding and trust. Endorphins flood the system, dulling pain and enhancing euphoria. Prolactin rises in the aftermath, promoting satiety and the refractory period. Meanwhile, brain regions that normally maintain control, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment and self-consciousness, go quiet. The result is a loss of inhibition, a surrender to sensation. At the same time, the insula, amygdala, and nucleus accumbens blaze with activity, magnifying body awareness, emotional intensity, and reward. Neuroimaging shows that climax is one of the most widespread activations the brain ever experiences, rivaling anything seen in food, music, or achievement. Subjectively, people describe this as losing themselves, as if time disappears. Seconds stretch into what feels like eternity. The mind cannot cling to thought because sensation overwhelms it. Self-awareness dissolves, replaced by pure experience. This altered state explains why orgasm is often compared to transcendence or spirituality, why it feels otherworldly, even though it is rooted in biology. It is the rare moment when the body seizes control of the mind, and the mind does not resist, but delights in the surrender. The point of inevitability, crossed moments earlier, now cascades into total release. Ejaculation in men is propelled by rhythmic contractions, semen expelled in bursts timed with pelvic pulses. In women, uterine contractions may pull semen deeper into the cervix, though the evolutionary purpose remains debated. These reproductive mechanics are important, but the subjective experience extends far beyond them. The contractions that drive reproduction also drive pleasure, turning a biological necessity into an ecstatic reward. Evolution ensured survival not by command, but by making climax irresistible. Descriptions of this peak vary, but themes recur across cultures and languages. Some call it fireworks, a sudden burst of light and sound inside the body. Others call it waves, rolling repeatedly, each crest more powerful than the last. Still others call it release, a dam breaking, tension flooding out in torrents. The metaphors differ, but all gesture at intensity, inevitability, and transformation. What is striking is that even with endless metaphors, no description ever feels complete. Each orgasm is unique, and each person's attempt to explain it reveals only one angle of an experience too vast for language. This stage is also accompanied by involuntary vocalizations and movements. Moans, cries, gasps, or shouts emerge without conscious control, driven by contractions of the diaphragm and throat as the nervous system fires. Muscles may spasm in arms or legs, toes may curl, backs may arch. These reflexes are not staged but spontaneous, physical echoes of the inner storm. They are signs that the body has been overtaken, that climax is not chosen but yielded to. This involuntariness is part of why orgasm feels so powerful. It cannot be faked internally, only mimicked externally. The real event seizes the body in ways impossible to replicate by will alone. Evolutionary logic reinforces why climax feels so extreme. By making orgasm intensely pleasurable, biology ensured that reproduction would be sought repeatedly. By making it brief but powerful, it guaranteed that the memory would be indelible, motivating pursuit again. The brief window of ecstasy became one of life's most compelling drives. Pleasure was the strategy, and climax was the hook that kept humanity returning to intimacy, not only to survive but to bond and thrive. From a clinical standpoint, the peak of orgasm is measurable. Pelvic floor contractions can be recorded on electromyography, showing pulses at predictable intervals. Hormone levels in blood spike sharply, especially oxytocin and prolactin. Brain scans light up across limbic and sensory regions. Heart rate and blood pressure reach their highest levels of the sexual cycle. These metrics confirm what people feel. The body is in a state of total activation. But what cannot be measured is the subjective experience, the heat, the shiver, the loss of time. That remains in the realm of mystery, even as science maps the circuits. After the contractions begin to fade, after the last wave of heat rolls through, the body collapses into release. Limbs may feel heavy, chest heaving, eyes closing in exhaustion or calm. The peak, though brief, leaves its mark. Muscles loosen, tension drains, breath slows. What follows is afterglow, but the memory of the peak itself is seared into mind and body. It is remembered not in detail, but in impression, overwhelming, consuming, beyond description. To reflect on this stage is to realize that orgasm feels not only like the contraction of muscles, but like the culmination of everything that came before. The tingling spark, the rush of blood, the tightening of tension, all of it converges here. Without the build-up, the peak would not feel so explosive. With it, climax feels like the release of everything held back, a moment when body and mind align in pure sensation. It is the thunder after lightning, the downpour after clouds, the resolution after endless suspense. Sex feels so good because it leads to this, the peak where contractions, heat and surges converge into ecstasy. Orgasm feels like a storm breaking inside the body, like being consumed and freed at the same time. It feels involuntary, inevitable, unforgettable. To ask what orgasm feels like is to point here, to the peak where language falters, where biology becomes bliss, and where the human experience transcends words. It is the summit of the climb, the briefest of moments, and yet one of the most extraordinary sensations life has to offer. When people speak of orgasm, they often describe it in terms of the body, the contractions, the heat, the shiver of release. But the true epicenter of climax is not in the pelvis, not in the muscles, not even in the skin. It is in the brain, Every contraction, every wave of sensation, every surge of warmth is filtered, interpreted, and magnified by the storm that takes over the nervous system. Orgasm is as much a psychological event as a physical one, and in many ways the subjective intensity of climax can only be understood by examining the neurochemistry that explodes during those fleeting seconds. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, and endorphins converge in a cocktail of reward and surrender, creating an altered state that no single physical act could generate on its own. The storm begins with dopamine, often called the brain's reward chemical. Dopamine is not simply about pleasure, but about anticipation, motivation, and craving. Long before climax, dopamine rises steadily, reinforcing the pursuit of intimacy, making every touch, sound, and glance feel charged. At the peak of orgasm, dopamine spikes in the nucleus accumbens, one of the brain's key reward centers. The result is euphoria, a sense of triumph, satisfaction, and joy, compressed into seconds. Subjectively, this feels like the thrill of winning, the exhilaration of accomplishment, but far more visceral and overwhelming. Dopamine tells the brain, "This matters, this is good, do this again." It ensures that the memory of orgasm is etched deeply, motivating future intimacy. Oxytocin is the second great player in the storm, sometimes called the cuddle hormone, or bonding chemical. Oxytocin is released in pulses from the hypothalamus during climax. Its effects are subtle but profound. Oxytocin deepens feelings of trust, emotional closeness, and connection to a partner. It is the reason orgasm can feel not only pleasurable, but meaningful, as if it seals a bond. For those with a partner, this manifests as tenderness, attachment, or the desire to hold each other afterward. Even in solitude, oxytocin's presence creates a sense of calm, a reminder that intimacy is not only physical, but emotional. Subjectively, oxytocin feels like warmth spreading not just through the body, but through the heart, a softening of defenses, a surrender into closeness. Endorphins, the body's natural opioids, surge during climax as well. Endorphins dull pain, reduce stress, and create a floating sensation of bliss. Athletes describe a runner's high, a mild cousin of the storm that accompanies orgasm. At climax, endorphins flood the bloodstream and brain, numbing discomfort and magnifying euphoria. Subjectively, they feel like melting, like floating, like dissolving into ease. They explain why climax can leave people smiling, drowsy, or utterly relaxed. The world feels softer, problems smaller, the body lighter. Endorphins cushion the intensity of contractions, turning what could be overwhelming into ecstasy. They are the brain's way of ensuring that the storm feels not chaotic, but blissful. Serotonin also rises in the aftermath of orgasm, stabilizing mood and promoting calm. Though less flashy than dopamine or oxytocin, serotonin provides the balance that follows climax. It explains the feeling of peace, of contentment, of being complete for the moment. Without serotonin, orgasm might feel frantic or unstable. With it, the storm resolves into serenity. Subjectively, serotonin is the sigh after climax, the stillness that follows, the sense of being grounded again after soaring. Norepinephrine adds another layer, heightening focus and intensifying sensation. Released by the adrenal glands and certain neurons in the brain, norepinephrine sharpens attention during arousal, making every touch feel amplified, every sound more vivid, every heartbeat more noticeable. At climax, norepinephrine contributes to the feeling of intensity, the sense that the world has narrowed to this one moment. Subjectively, it feels like being swept into tunnel vision, where everything except the sensation of orgasm disappears. It is urgency, sharpness, the bright edge of the storm. The combined effect of these chemicals is staggering. Together they create a cocktail of euphoria, bonding, calm, focus, and surrender. Subjectively, this is why orgasm feels not just like muscle contractions but like being overtaken, swept up, dissolved. It is not one chemical, but the symphony of all of them firing at once. The brain is not designed to separate them. Instead, it interprets the whole as ecstasy. This is why climax feels larger than life, like more than the sum of its parts. The storm is not only chemical but experiential, an altered state of consciousness produced by biology. Neuroimaging studies reveal just how profound this storm is. Functional MRI scans show widespread activation across the brain during orgasm. The nucleus accumbens, amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, cerebellum and insula all light up. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, planning and self-control, goes quiet. This shutdown explains the sense of surrender, the feeling of losing oneself. For a few seconds, judgment fades, self-awareness dissolves, and the body takes command. Subjectively, this feels like freedom, like being released from the burden of thought, like being wholly in the moment. This temporary silencing of control is one of the reasons orgasm feels spiritual, transcendent, beyond words. Another part of the storm is the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. During climax, activity here diminishes, lowering fear and anxiety. This neurological quieting explains why orgasm feels safe, why it can dissolve stress and create vulnerability. Subjectively, it is the sense of being sheltered, of being at peace, of being untouchable for those seconds. It is not only pleasure, but protection, as if the brain builds a temporary sanctuary in chemistry. The insula, a brain region tied to body awareness, is also hyperactive during climax. This is why contractions feel magnified, why tingles spread, why heat radiates. The insula ensures that every signal from the body is not only received, but intensified. Subjectively, this feels like being consumed, like sensation filling every corner of awareness. It is why orgasm feels total, as if the entire body has been swept into the event. Prolactin, released after orgasm, creates the sense of satisfaction that follows. It is what makes the body say enough, enforcing a refractory period in men and contributing to satiety in women. Subjectively, prolactin is the heaviness, the contented drowsiness, the refusal of the body to continue immediately. It ensures rest and recovery, preventing overstimulation. Without prolactin, the storm might rage endlessly. With it, the body is guided back to calm, ready to heal and restore. Psychologically, this storm feels like surrender. The loss of self-control, the flooding of euphoria, the bond of oxytocin, the peace of serotonin, the calm of endorphins, all combine into a moment where the mind steps aside and lets sensation rule. For some, this feels like unity with a partner. For others, it feels like transcendence beyond self. For still others, it feels like pure physical joy. The variety of descriptions reflects the individuality of the storm, but the common thread is that it feels bigger than ordinary life. It is not just pleasure, but transformation. Cultural metaphors reflect this truth. Orgasm is compared to lightning, fire, waves, explosions, or death and rebirth. These metaphors are not literal, but attempts to capture the altered consciousness created by the storm. No single image suffices, but together they reveal that people experience climax as something beyond explanation. Science can list chemicals, but people describe rapture. The gap between data and description is the mystery of the storm itself. Clinically, the importance of the brain storm is clear. Disorders that affect neurotransmitters, depression, anxiety, hormonal imbalances can interfere with orgasm. Medications that alter serotonin or dopamine can block climax or blunt pleasure. These challenges reveal that orgasm is not simply mechanical, but profoundly neurochemical. Without the storm, the contractions may occur, but the ecstasy is absent. This shows that orgasm is not only about reproduction, but about the brain rewarding survival with joy. Reflecting on this storm reveals why orgasm feels unforgettable. It is one of the rare times when so many brain systems fire in concert, when chemistry floods every pathway, when control fades into surrender. It is a neurological crescendo, a symphony of chemicals that the mind interprets as ecstasy. No wonder it feels mysterious, spiritual, or ineffable, because it is as much brain state as body state, as much psychology as physiology. Sex feels so good because climax unleashes this storm, because the brain is designed to reward intimacy with the most powerful cocktail of chemicals it can muster. Orgasm feels like euphoria and surrender, like fire and calm, like connection and transcendence all at once. It feels this way because dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, endorphins and prolactin converge in a singular moment, flooding the brain with signals that say, "This is extraordinary." To ask what orgasm feels like is to ask what the brain's storm feels like, and the answer is both scientific and beyond science. It feels like being overtaken, lifted out of ordinary reality, and returned gently with peace. It is the storm that makes climax unforgettable. The reason sex feels like more than reproduction. It feels like life at its most alive. Orgasm is often described with metaphors borrowed from storms, fireworks, or music, but one of the most consistent ways people talk about climax is by pointing to what disappears. Thought disappears. Control disappears. Time itself seems to vanish. This sensation of release and surrender is not just poetic exaggeration, but a measurable neurological event. During orgasm, the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain most responsible for logic, self-awareness and time perception, goes quiet. The silencing of this control center allows the body and more primal parts of the brain to take command, creating a state that feels both liberating and mysterious. Losing time and losing self are not side effects of orgasm. They are its essence, a core reason why the experience feels transcendent. The prefrontal cortex, located just behind the forehead, is what allows humans to plan, judge, and reflect. It is the voice that monitors behavior, asks, "What will others think?" and keeps emotions in check. In daily life, this voice is constant. It evaluates, restrains, critiques, and directs attention toward tasks. But during orgasm, blood flow to this region drops significantly and activity diminishes. Neuroimaging studies confirm that the prefrontal cortex essentially blinks out. Subjectively, this feels like surrender, as if the mind has stepped aside and let sensation rule. The self-consciousness that normally weighs on every moment disappears, replaced by pure experience. This silencing explains why orgasm feels timeless. The prefrontal cortex helps the brain track the passage of seconds and minutes. It creates the sense of continuity that allows us to plan for tomorrow and remember yesterday. When it quiets, the perception of time collapses. Climax may last only a few seconds, but it can feel expansive, as if stretched into eternity. People often describe orgasm as being outside of time, suspended in the moment, or lost in forever. These are not exaggerations, but the direct result of the brain losing its timekeeper. The world narrows to sensation, and sensation fills all of awareness. Surrender is another key dimension. In everyday life, humans exert enormous control over bodies and environments. We suppress urges, regulate emotions, and choose actions with deliberation. But orgasm is one of the rare times when control is not only lost but welcomed. The involuntary contractions of muscles, the gasps of breath, the flush of skin, all unfold without conscious choice. Because the prefrontal cortex is subdued, there is no urge to stop them, no embarrassment, no calculation. Subjectively, this feels like relief, like handing over responsibility, like letting the body lead. It is why orgasm is often compared to a fall, a plunge, or a letting go. The mind does not command the body carries the mind. The combination of timelessness and surrender creates the sense that orgasm is not just physical but transcendent. Many describe climax as a dissolving of self, a brief escape from the boundaries of identity. In those seconds, worries, insecurities, and obligations vanish. Some people report feeling as though they are outside themselves, others as if they are everything at once. Neuroscience explains this by pointing to the deactivation of the default mode network, a set of brain regions that maintain the sense of self. When this network goes quiet, the sense of I weakens, replaced by immersion in raw sensation. Subjectively, this is why orgasm can feel spiritual, like union with something larger, or like vanishing into the experience. The physical mechanics of orgasm, contractions, blood flow, hormones, are universal. But this altered state of consciousness is what gives it mystery. The shutting down of self-monitoring creates a contrast with ordinary awareness so stark that even the briefest climax feels monumental. It is not just that it feels good, it feels different from normal life in a way few other experiences do. Other altered states, such as meditation, deep prayer, or psychedelic use, also deactivate the prefrontal cortex, producing feelings of timelessness and ego dissolution. Orgasm, however, achieves this shift naturally through biology alone. This is why many traditions, both spiritual and secular, link sexuality with transcendence. The loss of time during orgasm also explains why people struggle to describe it afterward. Memories are imprinted in the hippocampus, but with the prefrontal cortex offline, the integration of those memories into narrative is weak. The result is that climax is remembered as intensity without detail, as impression rather than sequence. People say, "It felt like forever," or "it went by in a flash," because time perception during climax is distorted. This haziness of memory adds to the mystery, making orgasm difficult to pin down even for the person who experienced it. Subjectively, people report a range of sensations that echo the brain storm. Some describe floating, as if detached from gravity. Others describe being swept away, as if carried by a wave. Still others report a sense of merging with a partner, with the body, with the universe itself. These accounts differ, but they share the theme of self-loss, of boundaries dissolving. The body contracts, but the mind expands, paradoxically feeling both smaller and larger than itself. This paradox is the essence of surrender, to be fully in the body while forgetting the self. Evolutionary logic helps explain why the brain would allow such surrender. By making orgasm so rewarding, the brain ensured repeated pursuit of sex, guaranteeing reproduction. But by silencing self-consciousness, it also promoted bonding. Vulnerability in climax fosters intimacy, strengthening pair bonds. The shared surrender of two people creates trust, making them more likely to cooperate in raising offspring. Pleasure ensured survival. Surrender ensured connection. The timelessness of orgasm was not an accident but part of nature's strategy. Clinical evidence also highlights the role of the prefrontal cortex. Disorders that increase anxiety or hyperactivate self-monitoring can block orgasm. Individuals who cannot quiet the inner critic may struggle to reach climax because the brain cannot let go of control. Conversely, therapies that reduce anxiety or shift focus inward often restore orgasm by allowing the prefrontal cortex to quiet. This confirms that losing self is not a metaphor, but a neurological necessity for climax. Without surrender, the storm cannot break. Cultural descriptions of orgasm often mirror mystical states. In poetry, climax is the little death, a dissolution of identity. In spiritual traditions, it is union, transcendence, or ecstasy. These descriptions align with neuroscience. The quieting of the prefrontal cortex creates experiences indistinguishable from some religious or meditative states. The difference is context, but the brain activity is strikingly similar. This is why orgasm has always carried symbolic weight far beyond reproduction. It points to something larger, to the possibility that pleasure is a doorway to altered consciousness. Reflecting on this stage reveals why sex feels unforgettable. Orgasm is not simply about contractions or chemicals, but about the rare opportunity to lose the constant burden of self. In those seconds, the ticking of clocks, the chatter of thought, the weight of responsibility all vanish. What remains is sensation, immediacy, presence. The paradox of orgasm is that it feels both like everything happening at once and like nothing else in the world matters. The brevity of climax only heightens its power because it reminds us how unusual it is to be free of the self. Sex feels so good because it does not only reward the body but liberates the mind. Orgasm feels like release, like timelessness, like surrender. It feels this way because the prefrontal cortex quiets, because the self dissolves, because the brain allows sensation to take command. To ask what orgasm feels like is to understand this. It feels like stepping outside of time, outside of self, into a moment where nothing exists but the storm. It is the rare human experience where losing control is not danger, but bliss, where surrender is not weakness but ecstasy, and where biology delivers transcendence without words. Orgasm is one word, but it is not one experience. Ask 100 people to describe climax, and the answers split into patterns that echo two main themes. For some, orgasm arrives like a wave, slow to build, rolling across the body in pulses, lingering as it crests and falls again. For others, it strikes like a burst, sudden, explosive, concentrated in seconds of intensity that fade just as quickly. This diversity is not contradiction, but testament to the flexibility of human biology and psychology. The same nervous system, the same hormones, the same basic anatomy can create experiences that feel like entirely different phenomena. Waves and bursts are two expressions of the same storm, shaped by context, physiology, and perception. The wave is the more gradual experience. It begins with the steady build-up of arousal, tension tightening like a rope drawn taut. When climax arrives, the contractions of muscles, the flood of blood, and the chemistry of the brain do not all peak at once but undulate. Each contraction feels distinct, cresting like the top of a wave before easing and rising again. The sensation spreads, not confined to the genitals, but rippling into thighs, abdomen, chest, even fingertips. People who describe orgasms as waves often emphasize duration, a sense of being carried for seconds that feel like minutes, of floating rather than detonating. Subjectively, this feels expansive, immersive, like being lost at sea, riding currents beyond control. The burst is different. It arrives abruptly, often with less warning, as if the body leaps from tension straight into release. Contractions are rapid and intense, clustered tightly together, the body seizing and shuddering in quick pulses. The sensation is concentrated, overwhelming in force but fleeting in duration. Instead of spreading, it strikes like lightning, focused in the pelvis with shock waves that may radiate outward briefly before fading. People who describe orgasms as bursts often use metaphors of explosions, fireworks, or detonations. Subjectively, it feels like a dam breaking, a sudden collapse of restraint into pure release, sharp and consuming, but short-lived. Why the difference? Part of the answer lies in physiology. The frequency and strength of muscle contractions can vary between individuals and even between experiences in the same person. In some cases, contractions are spaced evenly, creating rolling waves. In others, they cluster tightly, creating bursts. Blood flow patterns also matter. Engorgement and vascular responsiveness can determine how sensations spread or concentrate. Hormonal fluctuations, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone affect sensitivity and duration. Higher oxytocin levels may prolong contractions, leading to wave-like experiences, while faster surges of dopamine may concentrate the sensation into bursts. Nerve pathways play a role as well. The pudendal nerve, responsible for genital sensation, transmits information rapidly to the spinal cord. But other nerves, such as the vagus nerve, can carry orgasmic signals directly from the cervix or deeper tissues to the brain, bypassing the spinal cord entirely. These alternate routes may create orgasms that feel more diffuse, more wave-like, while pudendal-driven responses may feel sharper and more explosive. The diversity of nerve wiring explains why some people consistently describe waves, others bursts, and still others experience both, depending on context. Psychology adds another dimension. The wave is more likely when anticipation is savored, when arousal builds slowly and evenly, when attention is spread across the whole body. The burst is more likely when stimulation is intense, focused, or abrupt. Mental state also shapes perception. Relaxation encourages waves, while urgency or high arousal may trigger bursts. Even expectations can influence the outcome. People primed to anticipate rolling intensity may experience sensations as waves, while those expecting sudden release may interpret sensations as bursts. The brain is not a passive observer, but an active interpreter, shaping how orgasm is felt. Cultural metaphors reinforce these differences. In poetry and song, waves represent surrender, flow, timelessness. Explosions represent intensity, passion, urgency. Both metaphors capture truths about climax, and both reveal the challenge of language. No single description can encompass the range of experience, so people reach for imagery drawn from nature and fire. Waves and bursts are not just metaphors. They are the closest tools language offers for sensations that resist description. Clinical research recognizes this diversity. Masters and Johnson documented that orgasms can vary in duration, contraction pattern, and subjective intensity. Some last only a few seconds, others stretch into half a minute or more. Some produce localized contractions, others create whole-body tremors. Hormonal studies confirm that oxytocin release can be prolonged in some cases, supporting waves, while in others, the release is sharp and brief, supporting bursts. Neuroscience shows that the same brain regions activate in both patterns, but the timing and intensity of activation differ. This proves that waves and bursts are not different categories, but variations on the same neurochemical theme. For individuals, the distinction matters less than the realization that diversity is normal. One person may consistently experience bursts, another waves, and another both depending on context. None is more correct or more valuable. The human body is designed for variability, and orgasm reflects that. Recognizing this can reduce the frustration that comes from comparison. What feels like an explosion for one person and a tide for another are both authentic expressions of the same climax. Subjectively, the wave is often described as immersive, like being carried. It feels continuous, expansive, and often more diffuse. People may report aftershocks, smaller contractions that ripple even after the peak. The burst, by contrast, is described as decisive, like a door slamming open. It feels concentrated, explosive, and final. Aftershocks may be fewer, but the initial intensity is overwhelming. These differences matter to personal perception, shaping how people remember and value the experience. Evolutionary perspectives suggest that both patterns may serve purposes. A burst guarantees strong reinforcement, ensuring that sex is memorable and repeated. A wave prolongs intimacy, strengthening bonding and encouraging pair connection. The presence of both in the population increases diversity, making human sexuality more flexible and adaptable. Pleasure was nature's insurance policy, and variety was part of its strength. Psychologically, the preference for wave or burst experiences may shape sexual behavior. Those who savor waves may prefer slower, drawn-out intimacy, while those who crave bursts may seek intensity and urgency. These preferences can vary not only between people, but within the same person across time, shaped by hormones, stress, and mood. What feels like a wave one day may feel like a burst the next, proving that orgasm is not static, but dynamic. Reflecting on your own experience may reveal which pattern feels most familiar. Do you feel carried on rolling tides of contractions or struck by sudden shocks of release? Do you remember the climax as expansive or as explosive? Recognizing these patterns is not about classification, but about appreciating the richness of human experience. The diversity of orgasm is a reminder that pleasure is not uniform, but endlessly varied. To ask what orgasm feels like is to confront the impossibility of one answer. It feels like waves, it feels like bursts, it feels like everything in between. It feels rolling, immersive, expansive. It feels sudden, explosive, overwhelming. Both truths coexist because orgasm is not a single shape, but a spectrum. The brain interprets, the body responds, and the experience emerges uniquely each time. This variability is not weakness but wonder. It is why climax defies definition, why people reach for poetry and metaphor, why the mystery endures. Sex feels so good because climax can be both, the wave that carries and the burst that consumes. Orgasm feels like riding tides and like being struck by lightning. It feels like surrender to currents and like detonation of energy. It feels this way because the body, in its complexity, offers more than one path to ecstasy. To ask what orgasm feels like is to recognize that it is not one thing but many, that its mystery lies not in uniformity but in diversity, that its truth is as wide as humanity itself. One of the most striking parts of orgasm is not what happens inside the body, but what escapes from it. The sounds that emerge during climax, gasps, cries, sighs, moans, are among the most universal and least controllable aspects of the experience. Unlike the carefully chosen words of daily speech, these sounds rise from somewhere deeper, a reflex of muscles and nerves responding to the storm of climax. They are not learned, not rehearsed, not consciously intended. They erupt spontaneously, shaped by physiology rather than choice. To understand what orgasm feels like is to also understand that its soundtrack is not performance but release, a raw expression of the nervous system letting go. Breath is the first sound to shift. During arousal, breathing quickens and deepens, but at climax it often breaks into gasps and shudders. The contractions of the pelvic floor are mirrored by contractions of the diaphragm, forcing air out of the lungs in bursts. Each pulse of muscle in the core sends a ripple upward, pressing on the lungs, driving sound through the vocal cords. This is why moans often align with contractions, why climax sounds rhythmic rather than steady. The body is pushing air as surely as it is pulsing muscles. Subjectively, the gasps feel like surrender, as if control over even breathing has been handed over to the storm. The vocal cords, vibrating as air passes, create the moans and cries so commonly associated with orgasm. Unlike speech, these sounds do not require the precise movements of tongue and lips. They emerge from the larynx, raw and unshaped, primal rather than polished. Neuroscience confirms that during orgasm, higher centers of language in the brain go quiet, while more primitive vocal centers in the brainstem activate. This is why the sounds are often incoherent, broken into fragments, sometimes reduced to syllables or noises that carry no linguistic meaning. Subjectively, this feels like release of language itself, as if words are too small to carry the magnitude of sensation. Culturally, these sounds have been mythologized, exaggerated, or misunderstood. In truth, they are not learned behavior, but biological reflex. Studies show that even in solitude, without an audience, people often produce the same involuntary vocalizations. They are not performance for a partner, but an unavoidable effect of climax. The body vents energy through sound as much as through muscle. This universality suggests that moans and cries during orgasm are as natural as laughter when amused or tears when grieving. They belong to the repertoire of human reflexes, triggered not by choice but by overwhelming emotion and sensation. Why would evolution favor such vocalizations? One theory is communication. In ancestral environments, sounds of climax may have signaled to partners that reproduction was successful, reinforcing pair bonding. Another possibility is group dynamics. Vocalizations may have carried through shared spaces, influencing others' arousal or cooperation. But beyond speculation, the physiological explanation is simpler. Sound is an inevitable byproduct of contractions and breath. Air must escape, and when it does, it creates sound. The fact that these sounds are often experienced as pleasurable, not distressing, reinforces the sense that they are part of the release, not a flaw in it. Subjectively, people describe the sounds of orgasm as uncontrollable. Gasps erupt without warning, moans slip out without intention, cries burst forth without thought. Some describe it as the body betraying them, others as the body liberating them. Either way, the key is that the sounds are reflexive. They feel authentic because they are authentic, not filtered through conscious control. This is why the sounds of climax often carry such emotional weight. They reveal vulnerability, exposure, honesty. The body, in its most intense moment, speaks in sound more primal than language. Science has measured these vocal patterns. Recordings reveal that the pitch of moans rises as arousal builds, peaking in frequency at climax. The amplitude or loudness often increases too, though cultural and environmental factors can modulate this. Some people allow the sounds to emerge fully, others suppress them consciously, but the reflex remains. Even when silence is chosen, the diaphragm still spasms, breath still hitches, the body still tries to make sound. The effort to contain it shows how automatic it truly is. Beyond moans and gasps, there are other sounds of release. Some people laugh during or after orgasm, a burst of joy or relief triggered by the same contractions of diaphragm and vocal cords. Others sigh deeply, a long exhalation as muscles relax. Still others cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming flood of oxytocin and dopamine. These variations highlight the emotional diversity of climax. Sound is not only the body's reflex, but also the mind's outlet for what words cannot capture. The sound of release also reinforces bonding. Hearing a partner's involuntary vocalizations deepens intimacy, creating trust. It signals authenticity, vulnerability, and pleasure. For many, the sounds are as meaningful as the physical acts, proof that climax has overtaken the other. This auditory exchange amplifies the experience, making it shared rather than solitary. Subjectively, hearing and producing these sounds creates a loop of connection, a rhythm of breath and voice that mirrors the rhythm of muscles and contractions. From a psychological perspective, the loss of vocal control mirrors the loss of self-control in the rest of the body. Just as the prefrontal cortex quiets, allowing surrender, the language centers of the brain fall silent, allowing primal sound to emerge. This parallel makes the sound of orgasm not an accessory, but an integral part of the altered state of consciousness. It is the auditory signature of surrender, proof that the storm has silenced thought and claimed the body. Clinically, the absence of sound does not mean the absence of orgasm. Some people climax quietly, either by nature or by choice, and their experiences are no less authentic. The variability reflects individual differences in physiology, personality, and environment. What unites them all is not the volume or type of sound, but the involuntary nature of whatever occurs. Whether a gasp, a sigh, a cry, or silence filled with trembling breath, the body is still releasing energy through reflex. Reflecting on this reveals that the sound of orgasm is not decoration but essence. It is the breath breaking into rhythm, the voice slipping past language, the body expressing what cannot be contained. It is why climax feels not only like sensation, but like expression, why it feels as though the body is speaking in a voice older than words. These sounds, involuntary and primal, are part of why orgasm feels authentic, overwhelming, unforgettable. Sex feels so good because climax overtakes not only muscles and nerves, but voice and breath. Orgasm feels like gasps that escape without permission, like moans that rise from deep within, like cries that echo the storm of release. It feels this way because the body does not only feel pleasure, it expresses it reflexively, audibly, universally. To ask what orgasm feels like is to also recognize what it sounds like, the unchosen soundtrack of release, the primal music of the body losing itself in pleasure. Orgasm is often spoken of as something confined to one place in the body, an event located in the pelvis or genitals, mapped neatly onto anatomy and nerves. But anyone who has experienced climax knows this is not the whole truth. For many, orgasm does not remain contained but spreads outward, rippling through the body in waves, creating tingles in the skin, shivers along the spine, and contractions that reach far beyond the initial spark. It is a storm that begins in one center but refuses to stay there, bursting into full-body fireworks. These fireworks are what transform orgasm from a local reflex into a global experience, an altered state of sensation that makes the whole body feel alive. The tingles are the first sign of this spread. Nerve endings across the skin, sensitized by arousal, respond to the surge of blood, hormones, and contractions. These tingles are not pain, not pressure, but a kind of buzzing awareness, as if every pore has turned into an antenna. They may begin in the lower abdomen or thighs, and then cascade outward, reaching the chest, arms, even the scalp. Some people describe it as electricity, a current racing under the skin. Others call it goosebumps, a prickling warmth that radiates outward. The truth is both. Tiny changes in nerve firing and skin sensitivity combine with the flood of endorphins to create a sensation the brain interprets as spreading delight. Shivers follow closely. The spine, lined with bundles of nerves, becomes a pathway for the storm. Contractions in the pelvis send signals upward, and the sympathetic nervous system amplifies them, producing tremors. These shivers are often involuntary, making shoulders quiver, legs shake, or toes curl. For some, they manifest as a full-body tremor, a shaking that seems to seize every muscle at once. For others, they are subtler, a shudder that rises like a wave through the back and neck. Subjectively, these shivers feel like being overtaken, as if the body cannot contain the intensity and must let it spill outward in motion. The contractions that begin in the pelvic floor also spread. Abdominal muscles tighten in rhythm, chest muscles may seize briefly, thighs clench, even hands may grip without intention. These contractions are part of the global pattern of orgasm, proof that the reflex is not localized but integrated. The body responds as a system, not a collection of parts. Each contraction is registered in the brain as part of the climax, adding to the impression of fireworks bursting across multiple regions. Subjectively, this feels immersive, as if every part of the body is participating, as if climax is not in one place, but everywhere at once. Neuroscience supports this description. During orgasm, brain regions responsible for body awareness, such as the insula, are hyperactive. This heightened activity means that signals from across the body are amplified and woven into the experience. A touch on the arm, a brush of hair, even the pressure of sheets can feel electrified. The brain is not filtering but enhancing, creating the impression that orgasm is expanding outward. Neuroimaging also shows that motor regions of the brain fire broadly, explaining why contractions and tremors occur in areas far from the pelvis. The fireworks are not imagined. They are the brain's integration of body-wide responses into one coherent experience. chemistry plays its role as well. Endorphins released in large quantities during climax create a diffuse glow of euphoria that is not limited to one part of the body. These natural opioids bind to receptors throughout the nervous system, producing a blanket of bliss. Combined with oxytocin, which heightens feelings of closeness and warmth, and dopamine, which drives pleasure and reward, the result is a flood of signals that the brain interprets as global rather than local. Subjectively, this chemical storm feels like melting into the body, like every part of the self is lit, every nerve awakened. Evolution may explain why climax feels so expansive. By making orgasm a full-body experience, not just a localized reflex, nature ensured that it would be unforgettable, motivating repeated pursuit. A purely pelvic reflex might achieve reproduction, but it would not create the kind of indelible memory that drives desire again and again. By flooding the whole body with sensation, the nervous system guarantees that climax is encoded as one of life's peak experiences. The fireworks are nature's way of making sure the act feels extraordinary, not just functional. Subjectively, people describe these full-body orgasms with metaphors that mirror the experience. Some say it feels like a wave crashing, rolling through every muscle. Others call it an explosion, fireworks bursting across the body. Still others compare it to flight, soaring weightless and free. These descriptions differ, but they all point to the same truth. Orgasm, at its most intense, does not remain confined, but spreads until the entire body feels transformed. This is why many people describe climax as not only physical, but emotional and spiritual. It is not just a reflex, it is an altered state of being. Variability, however, is part of the story. Not every orgasm becomes full-body fireworks. Sometimes the experience remains localized, sharp and sudden. Other times it spreads, diffuse and immersive. Context, mood, hormones and stimulation all influence the outcome. Relaxation, trust, and prolonged arousal often encourage spreading sensations, while stress or urgency may keep them localized. This variability explains why people describe different kinds of orgasms across different experiences, and why no single definition can capture them all. The fireworks are real, but not guaranteed. They depend on the intricate dance of body, brain, and circumstance. Clinical studies highlight the diversity of these experiences. Some people report orgasms that radiate from the genitals outward, while others describe orgasms that begin in the brain or chest and only later reach the pelvis. Certain types of stimulation, including deep nerve activation or whole-body touch, can produce orgasms that feel diffuse rather than localized. The vagus nerve, in particular, provides a direct pathway from the cervix and uterus to the brain, bypassing the spinal cord. This alternate route may explain why some describe orgasms that feel more expansive, less tied to pelvic contractions alone. Neuroscience confirms that multiple pathways can generate climax, and this multiplicity is what allows for fireworks as well as bursts. Psychology also shapes how the fireworks are felt. When the mind is free from distraction and inhibition, it is more likely to interpret the flood of signals as expansive. When the mind is anxious or constrained, it may narrow perception, focusing sensations into one region. Trust, relaxation, and imagination are therefore essential ingredients in whether climax feels local or global. Subjectively, this means that orgasm is not only about what the body does, but about how the mind receives it. Fireworks require not only sparks, but space to spread. Culturally, full-body orgasms have been celebrated as a pinnacle of intimacy, proof of deep connection or heightened awareness. Myths and traditions often link them to transcendence, describing them as mystical or divine. Whether framed spiritually or biologically, the theme is the same. Fireworks represent the most complete form of climax, the moment when body and mind are both overtaken. These narratives reflect the awe people feel when orgasm spreads beyond boundaries. when it feels less like a reflex and more like transformation. The after effects of full-body fireworks are profound. Because so many muscles are involved, the body may feel heavy, trembling, or exhausted afterward. The sense of glow may linger longer, with endorphins and oxytocin bathing the nervous system. People often report a deeper afterglow following full-body orgasms, describing serenity, bonding, or even catharsis. This reinforces the idea that fireworks are not only physical events, but psychological landmarks, moments that leave impressions long after contractions fade. Reflecting on this reveals why sex feels so extraordinary. It is not only the peak of pelvic contractions, but the possibility of total immersion. Orgasm feels like fireworks because it can spread, lighting up the body in tingles, shivers, and waves. It feels like surrender not only of control, but of boundaries, as if the body has dissolved into sensation. It feels expansive because the brain integrates every signal into one storm, turning local reflex into global ecstasy. Sex feels so good because climax is not confined but capable of spreading, capable of becoming fireworks across the body. Orgasm feels like tingles on the skin, shivers in the spine, contractions in every muscle. It feels like immersion, like being consumed, like transformation. To ask what orgasm feels like is to also ask where it is felt, and the answer is simple but profound. It can be everywhere. The fireworks of climax are the body's way of reminding us that pleasure is not small, not contained, but vast, expansive, and unforgettable. When the storm of orgasm has passed, when the contractions slow and the sounds of release fade into breath, what follows is as much a part of the experience as the peak itself. The body, having been charged to its limit, finally lets go. Muscles that had been clenched in tension soften, blood pressure begins to fall, and the nervous system shifts from arousal back toward calm. This transition, often described as the warm collapse, is one of the most distinctive parts of sexual experience. It is not only about exhaustion, but about release, a heaviness in the limbs, a glow in the body, a satisfied emptiness that paradoxically feels full. The climax may last only seconds, but the after-feelings linger, carrying a unique kind of peace. The most obvious change is in the muscles. During arousal and climax, nearly every muscle in the body tenses: pelvic floor, abdomen, thighs, shoulders, even hands and face. These contractions, both voluntary and involuntary, require intense energy and create a state of near-total rigidity. When orgasm ends, the muscles release all at once. The contrast is profound. The body goes from tight to loose, from clenched to relaxed, from tension to softness. Subjectively, this feels like melting, as if the body has turned to liquid, unable to hold itself rigid any longer. Limbs may feel heavy, sinking into the bed or ground, weighted not with strain, but with ease. This heaviness is not fatigue alone. It is relief, the pleasure of letting go. Breathing, too, transforms. What had been gasps and shudders now becomes deep, slow, sighing breaths. The diaphragm relaxes, lungs fill more fully, and oxygen floods back into tissues. Many people report sighing without intending to, a long exhalation that seems to rise from the chest itself. This sigh is not just mechanical, but emotional, the body's way of announcing that the storm has passed, that safety has returned. Subjectively, it feels like peace, a transition from urgency to serenity. The shift in breath reinforces the impression that orgasm is not only climax, but collapse, a letting down of defenses, a surrender into calm. Circulation also changes dramatically. During arousal, blood is drawn to erectile tissues, creating swelling and sensitivity. At climax, contractions drive even more blood into the pelvis. But once the peak ends, the process reverses. Blood gradually drains back into the wider system, engorgement diminishes, and skin flush fades. This redistribution leaves tissues sensitive, but also brings warmth across the body. Many describe this as a glow, a heat that lingers in the chest, belly and limbs. It is not the sharp heat of arousal, but the diffuse warmth of afterglow. Subjectively, this feels like being wrapped in a blanket from within, as if the body itself is radiating contentment. The nervous system is central to this collapse. During arousal, the sympathetic branch, responsible for fight, flight and arousal, dominates, raising heart rate, blood pressure and tension. But after orgasm, the parasympathetic branch takes over. Known as rest and digest, this system slows the heart, lowers blood pressure and calms the body. The transition is rapid and dramatic. Subjectively, this feels like dropping from a cliff into soft water, like sinking into a cushion, like the body has flipped a switch from intensity to calm. The suddenness of the shift is part of what makes the warm collapse so distinctive. It is not a gradual fade, but a plunge into stillness. Neurochemistry also contributes. Prolactin, released in large quantities after orgasm, creates a sense of satisfaction and satiety. It tells the body that enough has been achieved, that there is no need to continue. This hormone is particularly strong in men, enforcing the refractory period that makes immediate re-arousal difficult, but it affects women too, contributing to feelings of completeness. Subjectively, prolactin feels like the drowsiness after a large meal, the contentment of being sated. Combined with oxytocin, which continues to circulate and deepen feelings of closeness, the result is a warm, heavy serenity that anchors the body in peace. Endorphins, too, linger after climax, creating a cushion of euphoria and relaxation. They dull any residual discomfort from contractions or exertion, leaving only pleasure. These endorphins explain why many people smile or laugh quietly after orgasm, why they feel buoyant even as their bodies feel heavy. It is a paradoxical state, physically exhausted, yet emotionally light. Subjectively, this feels like floating and sinking at once, like being both heavy with rest and lifted by joy. The warm collapse is not only physical, but psychological. The loss of self-consciousness that began during climax often lingers. The inner critic remains quiet, the burden of thought lightened. For a few minutes, worries, obligations and anxieties feel far away. This mental calm is as much a part of the after-feeling as the muscular release. People often describe it as clarity, as silence, as a space where nothing intrudes. This quiet is one of the reasons sex is so compelling. It offers not only pleasure, but reprieve, a temporary escape from the noise of daily life. For those with partners, the collapse is often accompanied by a desire to remain close, to touch, cuddle, or simply rest together. Oxytocin deepens this impulse, reinforcing bonds through physical proximity. Subjectively, this feels like softness not only of muscle but of heart, a willingness to be vulnerable, to lean into connection. Even without words, the body communicates. Stay, hold, rest. The warm collapse becomes not only personal but shared, an intimacy that extends beyond climax. Variability exists, of course. Some people feel energized after orgasm, flooded with endorphins and ready to move. Others feel drowsy, overcome by the weight of release. Some feel euphoric, others serene, others contemplative. These differences reflect the interplay of body chemistry, context, and personal psychology. But all share the sense of transition, of a body that has shifted from storm to calm, from tension to rest. The warm collapse is universal in form, if not in exact feeling. Evolutionary biology explains why such a collapse would be advantageous. By making orgasm exhausting, the body encourages rest, ensuring recovery before another attempt. By flooding the system with prolactin and oxytocin, it reinforces pair bonding, encouraging partners to remain together in safety. By shifting the nervous system into parasympathetic dominance, it prevents overstimulation and damage. The warm collapse is not only pleasant, but protective, part of the design that made sex sustainable. Pleasure ensured repetition, but collapse ensured balance. Cultural metaphors mirror this truth. Literature and poetry often describe the aftermath of climax as languor, repose, or surrender. Ancient writers called it la petite mort, the little death, not only for the loss of self during climax, but for the heavy stillness that follows. Yet these descriptions often carry reverence rather than despair. The collapse is not seen as emptiness, but as peace, as the body's natural conclusion to intensity. The fact that so many cultures have named this feeling suggests its universality. Clinically, the warm collapse can be disrupted by stress, illness, or hormonal imbalance. If prolactin release is impaired, satisfaction may be muted, leaving a sense of restlessness. If anxiety remains high, the parasympathetic shift may not occur fully, preventing relaxation. These disruptions show how delicate the balance is and how essential the collapse is to the full experience. Without it, climax feels incomplete. With it, sex is remembered not only for the peak, but for the peace that follows. Reflecting on this reveals why sex feels so extraordinary. It is not only the fireworks of climax that matter, but the silence afterward, the melting, the heavy limbs, the glow that lingers. Orgasm feels like ecstasy, but the warm collapse feels like serenity, and together they form a cycle of intensity and rest. This alternation is part of what makes the experience so satisfying. The storm would be unbearable without the calm, and the calm would not be so sweet without the storm. Sex feels so good because it carries you through both, the explosive climax and the melting collapse. Orgasm feels like contractions and heat, but it also feels like release, like heaviness, like sinking into rest. It feels this way because the body is designed not only to thrill but to soothe, not only to excite but to calm. To ask what orgasm feels like is to also describe this: the warm collapse, the heaviness in the limbs, the satisfied exhaustion, the peace that follows the storm. It is the quiet that proves the noise was real, the stillness that makes the chaos worthwhile, the glow that makes the memory last. When the body collapses into warmth and stillness after orgasm, the physical release is only part of the story. The aftermath is not just muscle relaxation or heavy limbs, it is also an emotional flood. The chemistry of climax and the vulnerability of release combine to produce feelings that can be just as powerful as the contractions themselves. For some, this flood is euphoric, laughter bubbling up without reason. For others, it is bonding, a deep tenderness that draws them closer to a partner. For still others, it may be tearful, cathartic, a sudden rush of sadness or relief that cannot be explained by logic. The diversity of these emotional aftershocks reveals how orgasm is not simply a mechanical reflex, but a psychological and social event, one that shapes connection, intimacy, and memory. The foundation of this flood is chemistry. Oxytocin, already rising during climax, continues to circulate afterward, encouraging trust, closeness, and bonding. This hormone is released in pulses from the hypothalamus and acts on brain regions tied to social behavior and attachment. Subjectively, oxytocin feels like warmth, safety, and connection. It is why cuddling after sex feels natural, why touch feels essential, why silence shared in closeness feels complete. This is not sentimentality, but biology. Oxytocin ensures that orgasm is not only about pleasure, but about union, reinforcing the bonds that support partnership and, in evolutionary terms, the cooperative care of offspring. Endorphins add to this flood. These natural opioids continue to circulate, dulling pain and amplifying pleasure. But beyond euphoria, they create calm. The sharpness of sensation fades into a cushion of tranquility. Subjectively, this feels like serenity, a lightness of heart, a sense that everything is briefly okay. This calm is not passive, but profound. It is why orgasm can leave people smiling without cause, why the world feels softer and safer in those minutes after release. Endorphins make the emotional flood not overwhelming but soothing, balancing intensity with peace. Prolactin, the hormone of satisfaction, plays its role as well. Released heavily in the aftermath, prolactin signals to the brain that the task is complete, that satiety has been achieved. This chemical is what produces the refractory period in men and contributes to satiety in women. But beyond biology, it creates a feeling of completeness. Subjectively, prolactin feels like closure, the emotional equivalent of finishing a long journey. It explains why many people feel emotionally settled after orgasm, content to rest, uninterested in further pursuit. This sense of satisfaction is part of the emotional flood, ensuring that the experience is remembered as whole. But hormones do not tell the entire story. The emotional flood is also shaped by psychology, context, and memory. Orgasm requires vulnerability, the quieting of the prefrontal cortex, the loss of control, the surrender to reflex. That vulnerability, once past, leaves the mind open. For some, the openness translates into bonding. The emotional flood brings gratitude, affection, and closeness to a partner. For others, the openness brings catharsis. The flood of emotions may include tears, not of sadness, but of release. Tension carried in the body, stress held in the mind, can dissolve in the aftermath of climax. Subjectively, this feels like cleansing, as if the body has wrung out not only physical tension, but emotional weight. This cathartic aspect of orgasm is well documented. Known as post-coital dysphoria, some people experience sadness, tearfulness, or vulnerability after sex, even when the experience itself was pleasurable. This is not dysfunction, but part of the range of emotional responses to climax. The shutdown of self-monitoring regions in the brain, combined with the surge and ebb of neurochemistry, can expose emotions normally buried under control. The tears that appear are not contradictions but continuations of the release. Subjectively, they feel inexplicable but authentic, as if the storm has loosened something deeper than muscle. Euphoria is another common response. The dopamine high of climax lingers, reinforced by endorphins. For some, this manifests as laughter, playfulness, or a giddy joy that bubbles out uncontrollably. Subjectively, this feels like freedom, as if burdens have been lifted, as if the world is brighter. The laughter that emerges is no more chosen than the moans of climax. It is a reflex of joy, proof that orgasm does not end in silence, but ripples outward into emotional expression. This giddiness may be fleeting, but it leaves a memory of joy, ensuring that orgasm is remembered as more than physical. Serenity, perhaps the most common aftermath, is equally profound. With heart rate slowing, muscles loose, and hormones settling, the body enters a state of deep calm. Combined with oxytocin's encouragement of closeness, this calm feels like completeness. Subjectively, it is the glow, the quiet satisfaction, the sense that nothing more is needed. Many describe this as afterglow, a warmth that lingers long after contractions fade. This serenity is the emotional counterpart to the warm collapse of the body. It proves that orgasm is not only climax, but resolution, not only intensity, but peace. Variability is part of the flood's truth. The same person may experience bonding one time, catharsis another, euphoria another still, depending on context. Stress, trust, mood, and hormones all shape the outcome. A climax shared with a partner may produce tenderness, while one in solitude may bring serenity. A climax after stress may bring tears, while one after joy may bring laughter. The flood is not fixed but dynamic, proof that orgasm is not a single event but a doorway to many experiences. Evolutionary perspectives offer explanations. By flooding the aftermath with oxytocin and endorphins, the body ensures that partners feel close, encouraging them to remain together. By producing catharsis, the body may reduce stress, promoting mental health and resilience. By offering euphoria and serenity, the body reinforces the memory of sex as rewarding, ensuring pursuit again. The emotional flood is not a side effect, but a central part of the design, one that turns reproduction into connection, ensuring survival not only through biology but through bonding. Culturally, the flood has been interpreted in many ways. Some traditions see the tearfulness after orgasm as spiritual cleansing, a release of hidden pain. Others celebrate the laughter as divine joy, proof of life's vitality. In literature, the afterglow has been described as languor, repose, or the peace of completion. Across these depictions, the theme is the same. Orgasm changes not only the body, but the heart, leaving behind an emotional trace as vivid as the physical. Clinically, understanding the flood matters. When people experience sadness or confusion after climax, knowing that it is part of the range of normal can be reassuring. Postcoital dysphoria, though uncomfortable, is not rare, and often reflects the intensity of release rather than dysfunction. Similarly, the absence of euphoria does not mean the absence of orgasm. The flood is variable, shaped by countless factors. What unites it all is that orgasm does not end at the peak. It ripples outward into the emotions, shaping memory and meaning. Reflecting on this stage reveals why sex feels unforgettable. Orgasm is not only contractions and shivers, it is also bonding, catharsis, laughter, peace. It is not only a storm in the body but a flood in the heart. This emotional aftermath is what makes climax feel complete, what makes it more than reflex, what makes it matter. Pleasure is profound, but meaning comes from the emotions it leaves behind. Sex feels so good because climax does not stop at the body, but pours into the emotions, creating connection, release, and serenity. Orgasm feels like bonding, like tearful release, like euphoric joy, like serene glow. It feels this way because the brain and body are designed not only to create pleasure, but to give it meaning, to turn intensity into memory, to make the experience larger than itself. To ask what orgasm feels like is to also ask what it leaves behind. And the answer is this: the emotional flood, the after-feelings that prove the storm was real and the calm is earned. When climax fades and the storm of contractions, shivers and sounds falls silent, something remarkable remains. Long after the spasms stop, long after the heavy limbs settle into stillness, a quiet warmth endures. This is the glow that lingers, the afterglow of orgasm. It is not a fleeting moment, but a lasting state of calm, closeness, and contentment. For some, it is a few minutes of serenity. For others, it stretches into hours, a subtle light that colors the day. The glow is more than memory. It is chemistry, carried by oxytocin, prolactin, serotonin, and other neurochemicals that reshape mood, body, and heart long after climax has passed. The most famous of these is oxytocin. Sometimes called the bonding hormone, oxytocin floods the bloodstream during orgasm and continues to circulate in its aftermath. Released in pulses from the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary, oxytocin acts on both body and brain. It reduces stress by lowering cortisol, it enhances trust by activating social circuits, and it amplifies warmth by making touch feel more rewarding. Subjectively, oxytocin feels like connection, a desire to stay close, to cuddle, to linger in shared silence. It is why partners often find themselves embracing after sex, why solitude after climax may still feel softened by warmth. Oxytocin ensures that orgasm is remembered not only as physical ecstasy, but as intimacy, an experience that binds rather than divides. Prolactin plays a quieter but equally vital role. Released heavily in the aftermath of orgasm, prolactin signals satiety and completion. It is one of the key hormones responsible for the refractory period in men, the biological pause before arousal can build again, and it contributes to satisfaction in women as well. Prolactin quiets dopamine circuits, creating a feeling of contentment rather than craving. Subjectively, this feels like fullness, a sense that nothing more is needed, that the body and mind have had enough. It explains why orgasm can be followed by drowsiness, why sleep often comes easily afterward, why the glow feels like closure. Prolactin turns the urgency of desire into the peace of satisfaction, completing the cycle of intensity. Serotonin provides the balance. While dopamine drives pursuit and reward, serotonin stabilizes mood, offering calm and steadiness. After orgasm, serotonin levels rise, smoothing the emotional flood that precedes it. The result is tranquility, a sense of being grounded, a quiet joy that does not burn brightly, but glows softly. Subjectively, serotonin feels like peace, like a soft exhale, like being safe in the present. It ensures that after the fireworks of climax and the collapse into rest, the lingering glow is not jittery, but serene. Serotonin is the gentle hand that guides the body from storm to stillness, transforming ecstasy into memory. The combination of these chemicals, oxytocin for bonding, prolactin for satiety, serotonin for calm, creates a unique state that no single neurotransmitter could produce alone. Together, they weave the fabric of afterglow, a biological cocoon that surrounds the mind and body. Subjectively, this feels like harmony, as if all systems are aligned, as if the body and brain are humming in unison. The glow is not sharp or loud, but deep and quiet. The kind of feeling that resists description precisely because it is so steady. It is the opposite of climax in tempo, but equal in importance. For many, the afterglow is inseparable from intimacy. It is during this stage that couples talk softly, share secrets, or simply lie together in silence. The oxytocin-driven closeness transforms vulnerability into trust, making bonds stronger. Research confirms that couples who experience afterglow report greater satisfaction and intimacy in their relationships. Subjectively, this feels like safety, like being seen and accepted, like a bond reinforced by the chemistry of release. The glow is not only personal but relational, extending beyond the self into connection. But the glow is not reserved for partnerships. Even in solitude, the afterglow remains. Oxytocin may still circulate, though directed inward as warmth rather than outward as bonding. Prolactin still produces satiety, serotonin still steadies mood. Subjectively, this means that the glow can feel like self-acceptance, like ease within one's own skin, like being whole without need for more. Solitary orgasm proves that the glow is not dependent on others, but is a feature of the human body itself, a gift of biology designed to make pleasure sustainable. The glow also explains why orgasm is remembered so vividly. The brain does not only store the peak of contractions, but the calm that follows. The tranquility imprints as much as the ecstasy, teaching the nervous system that sex is not only thrilling but soothing. This memory drives future desire, ensuring that sex is sought not only for climax, but for the peace that lingers. Subjectively, this feels like craving not just the fireworks but the glow, not just the intensity but the serenity. The afterglow becomes as much a reward as the climax itself. Evolutionary logic supports this design. By creating a lasting glow, biology ensured that sex was not just a momentary act, but an event that shaped behavior beyond its duration. The oxytocin-driven bonding promoted pair stability. The prolactin-driven satiety prevented exhaustion and ensured recovery. The serotonin-driven calm reinforced cooperation and reduced conflict. Together, they made orgasm not only reproductive but social. embedding it in the framework of human connection. The glow was nature's way of making sure sex mattered beyond its mechanics, turning it into a glue that held people together. Subjective descriptions of the glow vary, but share common themes. Some call it warmth, a heat that lingers in the chest and belly. Others call it heaviness, the sinking of the body into softness. Still others call it lightness, the lifting of burdens from the mind. These contradictions reflect the complexity of the glow. It is both heavy and light, warm and cool, grounding and liberating. People often describe it as radiance, as if they are glowing from within. This metaphor is apt, for the glow is felt not in one place but throughout, a diffuse presence that makes the body feel illuminated. Cultural depictions of afterglow often emphasize intimacy and peace. In poetry, lovers are described as lying entwined, bathed in warmth, speaking little because nothing more is needed. In philosophy, afterglow has been interpreted as proof of the harmony between body and soul. In modern science, it is measured in hormonal assays and surveys of mood, but even here, the emphasis is on its persistence. The fact that so many traditions have named this feeling, afterglow, repose, languor, speaks to its universality. The glow is as much a part of sex as the climax itself, woven into human memory across cultures. Clinically, disruptions in the glow can signal imbalance. If prolactin release is blunted, satisfaction may be incomplete, leaving restlessness. If oxytocin is low, bonding may be weakened, leaving distance. If serotonin pathways are impaired, the calm may not arrive, leaving agitation. These challenges reveal how essential the glow is to sexual health, how deeply it contributes to satisfaction. Treatments that restore balance through therapy, medication, or lifestyle often restore not only climax, but afterglow, proving that the glow is a measurable, vital part of sexual well-being. Reflecting on this stage reveals that orgasm is not a single point but a cycle. The spark builds into blood and breath, tension rises, climax arrives, collapse follows, and then the glow lingers. Each stage is essential, but the glow is what ties it together, what ensures that the memory is not only of intensity, but of harmony. It is the lasting reward, the reminder that the body is not just capable of ecstasy, but of peace. Sex feels so good because it ends not in emptiness, but in glow. Orgasm feels like intensity, but afterward it feels like calm, closeness, serenity. It feels this way because oxytocin binds, prolactin satisfies, and serotonin steadies. It feels this way because the body is designed not only to reward climax, but to extend its gifts, to let the warmth linger, to let the light stay. To ask what orgasm feels like is to also ask what remains after it. And the answer is this: the glow that lingers, the quiet light that proves the storm was real and that peace can follow chaos. When people speak about orgasm, the temptation is to treat it as one thing, a single universal event, the same for everyone, predictable and uniform. But this is an illusion created by language, not by biology. In truth, orgasms vary as widely as the people who experience them. They are different in shape, in duration, in intensity, in quality. They vary across bodies, across ages, across contexts. They can be rolling waves or sudden bursts, full-body tremors or localized pulses, emotional floods or quiet sighs. They may feel mystical or mechanical, transcendent or simply satisfying. And yet, despite this staggering diversity, there is one unifying thread: the summit itself. No matter how different the path, orgasm carries a common intensity, a shared destination of release, surrender, and ecstasy. This diversity begins in physiology. Male and female bodies are wired with overlapping but distinct patterns of nerves, blood flow, and hormones. In men, orgasm often coincides with ejaculation, a coordinated reflex that delivers semen while delivering pleasure. But orgasm can also occur without ejaculation, known as dry orgasm, especially in younger boys or in men who have learned to separate the two. In women, orgasm does not hinge on ejaculation, and so it manifests in varied ways: clitoral, vaginal, blended, cervical, or diffuse experiences that resist neat categories. Some orgasms last a few seconds, others linger for half a minute or more. Some are sharp, others are rolling. This physiological variability means that even before psychology enters the picture, orgasms already exist on a spectrum. Nerve pathways add another layer of complexity. The pudendal nerve carries most genital sensations, but it is not the only route. The vagus nerve, which bypasses the spinal cord entirely, can transmit signals from the cervix and uterus directly to the brain. This explains why some people experience orgasms that feel deep, whole body, and less localized, while others experience sharper, surface-level climaxes. Different nerves create different textures of orgasm. Subjectively, this feels like a range of flavors. One orgasm may feel like fire, another like water, another like thunder rolling through the body. The nervous system is capable of multiple routes, and each route offers its own summit. Context shapes the path as much as anatomy. An orgasm experienced in solitude may feel focused, inward, meditative. An orgasm with a trusted partner may feel bonding, expansive, suffused with intimacy. An orgasm in a moment of urgency may feel explosive. One in a moment of relaxation may feel diffuse and wave-like. Even the same person can experience dramatically different orgasms depending on mood, stress level, trust, and time. Subjectively, this means that orgasm is not a single, repeatable event, but a kaleidoscope, each moment arranging the same elements into a new pattern. Hormones also shape the variety. Testosterone increases desire and sensitivity, making orgasms more frequent or easier to reach. Estrogen influences lubrication, blood flow, and nerve responsiveness, changing the intensity and texture of orgasm across the menstrual cycle. Progesterone can dampen or heighten responses depending on timing. After menopause or andropause, orgasms may feel different, sometimes less sharp, sometimes slower, sometimes more diffuse. Pregnancy changes everything again, creating heightened blood flow and sensitivity that can make orgasms more powerful for some. Aging, illness, medication, or stress can alter the path dramatically. Yet even with these changes, the summit, the release, the contraction, the glow remains familiar. Psychology plays perhaps the greatest role in shaping the path. Orgasms are easier and more intense when the mind is free of anxiety, when self-consciousness fades, when trust is present. For some, fantasy and imagination amplify sensation, layering mental arousal onto physical stimulation. For others, mindfulness, focusing only on the present, deepens intensity. Trauma or inhibition can block orgasm entirely, proving how essential psychology is to the process. Subjectively, this means orgasm can be fickle, elusive when sought desperately, overwhelming when allowed to arrive naturally. It is a reminder that climax is not only in the body but in the mind, not only reflex but surrender. Culture shapes the narrative of orgasm as well. In some traditions, climax is celebrated as spiritual transcendence, a union of body and soul. In others, it is minimized or even stigmatized, framed as something to be controlled. These cultural scripts shape expectations, which in turn shape experiences. Someone who grows up believing orgasm should be explosive may interpret their own rolling wave as inadequate. Someone taught to see orgasm as sacred may frame the same sensations as mystical. The physiology does not change, but the story we tell ourselves about it does, and the story becomes part of the experience. Despite all this variation, orgasm has a common core. The contractions of the pelvic floor, the flood of dopamine and oxytocin, the silencing of the prefrontal cortex, the loss of time and self, all these appear across individuals, across contexts, across cultures. The subjective interpretation may differ, but the biological storm is shared. This is why people can describe orgasms in radically different metaphors, yet still recognize the commonality in each other's accounts. One person's wave and another's burst are two shapes of the same summit. The core intensity, the sense of being overtaken, is the universal thread. Subjectively, this means that orgasm feels both deeply personal and universally human. It feels unique, shaped by your body, your context, your mind, but it also feels familiar, as if touching something shared across humanity. This paradox, different paths, same summit, explains why orgasm is so hard to describe and yet so instantly recognizable. The experience is yours alone, yet it is also ours collectively. It is private and universal at once. From an evolutionary perspective, this diversity was advantageous. By allowing multiple paths to orgasm, biology ensured that the experience would be resilient. If one pathway was blocked by injury, stress, or environment, others could still function. If one context was not available, another could still produce climax. This redundancy guaranteed that pleasure, and therefore reproduction, would persist. The universality of the summit ensured survival, while the variability of the paths ensured flexibility. Pleasure was not uniform, but adaptable, as human as fingerprints. Clinically, understanding this variety is essential. Some people worry that their orgasms are not normal because they are quieter, shorter, slower, or less explosive than cultural myths suggest. In reality, all these experiences fall within the wide spectrum of normal. The presence of contraction, release, altered consciousness, and afterglow are the shared features. The rest is individual variation. Recognizing this can ease anxiety and increase satisfaction, allowing people to appreciate their own paths rather than chasing an imagined ideal. Reflecting on this truth reveals why sex is so compelling. It is not predictable repetition but discovery, each encounter capable of revealing a new texture of climax. The body does not repeat exactly. It improvises, guided by nerves, hormones, emotions, and context. This is why orgasm is never boring, why it resists monotony, why it retains its mystery even after decades. Each path may differ, but the summit never loses its intensity. Sex feels so good because orgasm is both diverse and universal. It feels unique each time, shaped by countless factors, yet always converging on the same release, the same surrender, the same glow. Orgasm feels like waves or bursts, like intimacy or solitude, like laughter or tears, but always like being overtaken. It feels this way because the body allows for many routes but one destination. To ask what orgasm feels like is to accept that there is no single answer and yet one truth. Different paths, same summit. The human experience of pleasure in all its diversity and its unity. Most people think of orgasm as a single peak, one climb followed by one summit, a brief storm that passes quickly into stillness. But for some, orgasm is not a solitary mountain, but a range, not a single firework, but a cascade of bursts. These are the multiple orgasms, experiences where climax does not end with one peak, but rolls into another, sometimes again and again, creating a sequence of releases that blur together into an extended storm. This phenomenon has fascinated scientists and storytellers alike because it challenges the assumption that orgasm is always singular. For those who experience multiples, the feeling is not simply more of the same, but qualitatively different. An altered state of rhythm, repetition, and endurance that stretches pleasure beyond ordinary limits. The physiology of multiple orgasms reveals why they are possible. In men, orgasm and ejaculation are often linked tightly together. Ejaculation triggers a refractory period, driven largely by prolactin and changes in the nervous system that prevents immediate rearousal. This refractory period can last minutes, hours, or longer depending on age, health, and hormonal balance. But in women, orgasm is not bound to a single reflex of ejaculation, and the refractory period is shorter or absent. This makes multiple orgasms more common in female physiology, though not exclusive to it. Some men learn to separate orgasm from ejaculation through training, allowing repeated peaks without a long refractory period. This diversity proves that biology is flexible, and that multiple orgasms are not a myth, but a genuine feature of human sexuality. Subjectively, multiple orgasms feel different from single peaks. The first climax may be intense, sharp, and consuming, but instead of collapsing fully into afterglow, the body remains primed. Blood flow to erectile tissues remains high, oxytocin and dopamine continue to circulate, and the nervous system stays activated. With additional stimulation, contractions build again, often faster and with less tension needed than before. The second orgasm may feel slightly different, less sharp but deeper, more diffuse, more wave-like. Some describe it as a rolling tide that grows and grows, rather than an explosion. Others find that each orgasm becomes weaker after the first, tapering off like aftershocks. Still others describe the opposite, that each wave builds on the last, creating intensity that peaks higher than the first climax. The variability in these reports highlights how multiple orgasms are not uniform. For some, they are a series of smaller peaks clustered together, like a string of firecrackers. For others, they are a continuous wave with crests that blend into one another, more like a prolonged symphony than distinct songs. Subjectively, this can feel like losing track of where one climax ends and another begins, a blur of contractions, tingles, shivers, and altered consciousness that feels timeless. The normal collapse and glow are delayed, replaced by an extended plateau that keeps the body in motion. This extended storm explains why multiple orgasms are often described as exhausting, even overwhelming, but also profoundly satisfying. Hormones and neurochemistry play a central role in determining whether multiples occur. Prolactin is the main hormone responsible for shutting down desire after orgasm, creating the refractory period. Lower prolactin release allows quicker recovery and the possibility of repeated peaks. Oxytocin and dopamine, on the other hand, encourage continued arousal and sensitivity. If these remain elevated after the first climax, the body may stay receptive. Endorphins cushion the intensity, preventing the contractions from becoming painful even when repeated. Subjectively, this feels like endurance, as if the body has found a rhythm it can sustain, as if pleasure is being stretched out rather than shut down. Psychology and context are equally important. Relaxation, trust, and focus allow the body to stay open to repeated stimulation. Anxiety or distraction often shorten arousal, making multiples less likely. Mental framing also matters. Some people enter sexual experiences expecting a single climax, and once it arrives, the body aligns with that expectation and collapses. Others approach with the idea of building waves, and their bodies follow that script. Imagination, fantasy, and openness can encourage multiple orgasms by priming the nervous system for repetition rather than resolution. Subjectively, this feels like choosing to stay on the roller coaster rather than stepping off, like riding wave after wave until the body finally demands rest. Culturally, multiple orgasms have been celebrated as a kind of sexual superpower. Stories of tantric traditions, of extended sessions lasting hours, of orgasms numbering into the dozens, fuel the imagination. While some of these tales may exaggerate, the reality is already extraordinary. Some people truly do experience multiples easily and often, while others find them rare or elusive. The cultural fascination reflects the human tendency to measure sexuality in terms of endurance and intensity. But the truth is that multiples are not better than singles, just different. The summit is the same, but the path winds differently. The value lies not in the number, but in the authenticity of the experience. Scientific studies confirm that multiple orgasms are not rare, but not universal either. Surveys suggest that many women experience at least one multiple orgasm in their lifetimes, but fewer experience them regularly. Among men, multiples are less common but still documented, particularly among those trained in practices that separate ejaculation from orgasm. The physiology, psychology, and context combine to determine likelihood. But all agree on one point: multiple orgasms, when they occur, feel qualitatively different from singular ones. Subjectively, this difference is the essence of the mystery, why some can ride wave after wave while others cannot. The subjective descriptions of multiples are as varied as the experiences themselves. Some describe a ladder, each orgasm a rung leading higher until the final climax feels transcendent. Others describe ripples, each orgasm smaller than the last, until they fade gently into afterglow. Still others describe a single storm that never quite ends, contractions rolling without pause, leaving them breathless and trembling. The metaphors differ, but all capture the same truth. Multiple orgasms expand time, extend intensity, and blur the boundaries of climax. From an evolutionary perspective, multiples may have served reproductive purposes. For women, multiple orgasms may have increased the chances of conception by pulling semen deeper into the cervix through repeated contractions. For men, the ability to separate orgasm from ejaculation may have provided an advantage in mating competition, allowing repeated stimulation without immediate exhaustion. But beyond reproduction, multiples may have served social purposes, reinforcing pair bonds, extending intimacy, deepening trust. Pleasure was not only about reproduction, but about connection, and multiples made that connection longer and stronger. Clinically, multiples are often misunderstood. Some assume they are rare miracles, others assume they should be universal. The truth lies between. Multiples are natural, possible, and common for some, but they are not a standard that all should meet. The anxiety created by chasing multiples can actually block them, turning the experience into performance rather than surrender. The key is acceptance. For those whose bodies and minds allow multiples, they are a gift. For those who experience single peaks, they are no less complete. The summit is the same, whether reached once or many times. Reflecting on this stage reveals the beauty of human diversity. Orgasms are not uniform, but flexible, capable of adapting to body, context, and desire. Multiples are one expression of that flexibility, proof that sexuality is not rigid but dynamic. They show that climax is not bound by one script but open to variation, that pleasure is not fixed but fluid. This fluidity is what makes sexuality endlessly fascinating, never predictable, always new. Sex feels so good because orgasm is not only one summit but sometimes many. It feels like waves cresting again and again, like bursts that repeat in sequence, like a storm that refuses to end. It feels this way because the body can override the usual stop signal, keeping desire alive, keeping contractions rolling, keeping chemistry flowing. To ask what orgasm feels like is to recognize this too, that sometimes it feels not like one moment, but like many, not like a single climax, but like a series, not like a mountain, but like a whole range. The multiple mystery is proof that sexuality is larger than any definition, that its variety is as boundless as its intensity. When people try to explain what orgasm feels like, they often start with the physical, the contractions, the warmth, the tingling nerves, the shuddering breath. But in almost every culture, across languages and centuries, there are descriptions that reach further than biology. Orgasm is compared to transcendence, to leaving the body, to touching something otherworldly. Some call it a spiritual experience, others describe it as a dissolving of the self, and still others frame it as communion with something greater than the individual. This sense of orgasm as beyond the physical is not superstition or exaggeration, but part of the profound way climax alters consciousness. It changes not only what the body feels, but how the mind perceives reality, time, and self. The neurological basis for this transcendence is the silencing of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-awareness, planning, and judgment. When this region goes quiet during orgasm, the boundaries of self dissolve. The default mode network, the set of brain areas that maintains the narrative of I, loses dominance. Without it, the mind is free from the usual chatter of thought, the constant stream of identity and worry. Subjectively, this feels like disappearing, like slipping into something larger, like merging with sensation itself. People describe it as floating outside themselves, as melting into a partner, as touching the infinite. The brain, in losing control, gives rise to experiences that feel spiritual. Neurochemistry reinforces this shift. Dopamine floods reward pathways, producing euphoria that feels larger than ordinary joy. Oxytocin deepens connection, creating intimacy that can feel sacred. Endorphins reduce pain and heighten bliss, creating sensations that are not just pleasure, but release from suffering. Serotonin rises afterward, grounding the experience in peace. Together, this cocktail creates an altered state of consciousness, one that shares features with meditation, prayer, and even psychedelic states. Subjectively, this means orgasm does not feel like ordinary sensation. It feels transformative, expansive, beyond the physical body. Cultures throughout history have recognized this transcendence. In ancient Greek philosophy, orgasm was called the little death, la petite mort, a moment where the self dissolves and the soul touches something beyond. In tantric traditions of India and Tibet, orgasm is framed as union with the divine, an energy that flows through the body to connect with cosmic forces. In mystic poetry from Sufi and Christian traditions, sexual ecstasy is used as metaphor for spiritual union, and sometimes the reverse. Orgasm itself is seen as a path to the sacred. These descriptions, though wrapped in cultural language, all point to the same truth. Orgasm feels beyond physical because it alters consciousness in ways that mimic spiritual states. Subjectively, people describe orgasmic transcendence in strikingly similar terms. They speak of light, of expansion, of dissolving into everything, of being lifted out of time. Some feel they have touched divinity, others that they have merged with their partner into one being. Some describe colors or visions behind closed eyes, others describe sound dissolving into silence. These reports mirror accounts of deep meditation or psychedelic journeys, suggesting that orgasm taps into the same brain systems that create mystical experiences. This is why it feels otherworldly, even though it is rooted in biology. Psychologically, the sense of transcendence may come from surrender. Orgasm requires letting go, of control, of thought, of inhibition. In surrender, people often feel they are not acting, but being acted upon, not guiding but flowing. This loss of agency can feel frightening in ordinary life, but in the safe container of intimacy, it feels liberating. Subjectively, this surrender feels like being carried, like being part of something larger, like being held by forces beyond oneself. The transcendence is not escape, but immersion, not loss, but expansion. For some, orgasm brings catharsis that feels spiritual. Tears, laughter, or profound calm may follow, not because of physical mechanics alone, but because something deeper has shifted. Stress dissolves, fear lifts, grief releases. Subjectively, this feels like cleansing, like renewal, like being reborn in small form. It is not surprising that spiritual traditions have long tied sexuality to purification, seeing in climax a mirror of release and renewal. Not everyone experiences orgasm this way, and not every orgasm feels transcendent. Sometimes it is simply pleasure, sometimes relief, sometimes satisfaction. But the potential for transcendence exists in the biology itself. Whether or not it feels spiritual depends on context, mindset, and interpretation. Trust, intimacy, and openness make transcendence more likely. Anxiety, distraction, or shame may narrow the experience to its mechanics. Subjectively, this means that orgasm is a spectrum, sometimes grounded in body, sometimes soaring into spirit, both authentic, both true. Evolutionary logic may even explain the transcendent dimension. By making orgasm feel larger than life, biology ensured that people would seek it repeatedly. By linking it with bonding and intimacy, it promoted pair stability. By flooding it with meaning beyond the physical, it created cultural narratives that reinforced its importance. Pleasure ensured reproduction, transcendence ensured cooperation, and together they made sexuality central to human experience. The sense of touching the sacred may be nature's way of making sex unforgettable, embedding it not only in the body, but in the soul. Clinically, the transcendent dimension of orgasm has drawn interest. Studies show that brain activity during climax resembles activity during deep meditation and certain psychedelic states. The silencing of the prefrontal cortex, the activation of the insular and limbic system, the surge of serotonin, all mirror altered states. Therapies that focus on mindfulness or body awareness often enhance orgasmic experiences, making them more expansive and transcendent. Subjectively, this means that cultivating presence, trust, and openness can transform orgasm from physical reflex to mystical journey. The biology is always there. The interpretation is what makes it otherworldly. Culturally, framing orgasm as transcendent has shaped entire traditions of sexuality. Tantra teaches that orgasm is not a peak to chase, but an energy to expand, a way of touching the divine through the body. Taoist traditions speak of cultivating sexual energy as life force, extending orgasm into spiritual practice. Western mysticism, too, has borrowed sexual language to describe divine union, proof that the metaphor works both ways. These traditions remind us that sex has always been seen as more than physical, that the transcendence people feel is not a modern invention, but an ancient truth. Reflecting on this reveals why orgasm remains so mysterious despite centuries of study. The contractions and chemistry can be measured, the hormones can be tracked, the brain scans can be mapped. But the subjective sense of touching something beyond remains ineffable. Orgasm feels like leaving the body while being more in it than ever. It feels like dying for a moment and being reborn. It feels like merging with another, or with the universe itself. Science can explain the mechanics, but the meaning is personal, cultural, and spiritual. This is why orgasm resists reduction, why it always feels more than physical. Sex feels so good because orgasm does not end with muscles or nerves. It feels like surrender, like expansion, like transcendence. It feels this way because the brain is wired to silence the self, to flood the body with bliss, to create an altered state that mimics spiritual experience. To ask what orgasm feels like is to recognize this. It feels physical, yes, but it also feels like more, like touching the infinite through the finite, like brushing against the sacred in the most human act. Beyond the physical lies the mystery, the transcendence, the reason orgasm feels like both biology and miracle. At the end of all this exploration, the muscles, the nerves, the hormones, the brain storm, the waves and bursts, the sounds, the afterglow, even the transcendent possibilities. One truth remains. Orgasm cannot be perfectly described. Science can map it, charting every contraction, every surge of dopamine, every flicker of brain activity. Language can reach for it, filling pages with metaphors of lightning, fire, waves, or death and rebirth. Culture can ritualize it, turning it into symbol, poetry, or myth. Yet the experience itself remains slippery, refusing to be fully pinned down. To ask, What does orgasm feel like is to chase a paradox. It is real, measurable, universal, and at the same time private, subjective, and unspeakable. This is the secret at the heart of human sexuality. Orgasm belongs to both biology and mystery, to both science and silence. The difficulty begins with language itself. Words are tools designed for ordinary life: food, work, emotions, places. They describe what can be seen, touched, and shared. Orgasm, by contrast, is internal, fleeting, and overwhelming. It does not lend itself to tidy sentences. People reach for metaphor because literal words fail. They say it is like fireworks, like falling, like drowning, like flying. Each metaphor captures a piece, but misses the whole. No two descriptions are the same because no two experiences are the same. Subjectively, this feels like knowing something with absolute certainty in your body, but being unable to carry it intact into words. The gap between sensation and speech is the unspeakable secret. Science has narrowed the gap, but not closed it. Neuroscientists can show that dopamine spikes in the nucleus accumbens, that oxytocin surges from the hypothalamus, that prolactin enforces satiety, that the prefrontal cortex goes quiet while the limbic system explodes with activity. These are extraordinary insights, but none of them convey what it feels like when contractions ripple through the pelvis, when time disappears, when the self dissolves. A chart of hormone levels is not the same as a sigh, a gasp, or a cry. A brain scan cannot translate the glow that lingers. Science maps the pathways, but the destination remains beyond its borders. Subjectively, this means that orgasm can be studied endlessly, but never reduced to data. The map is detailed, but the territory is felt. Even within one person, orgasm resists uniform description. One climax may be a wave, rolling and expansive. The next may be a burst, sharp and explosive. One may bring laughter, another tears, another serenity. Hormones shift, nerves fire differently, psychology and context reshape the path. Memory further complicates things. The brain encodes impressions, but not sequences. So orgasm is remembered as intensity without detail, as blur rather than chronology. When people try to recall and explain, they reconstruct from fragments. Subjectively, this is why orgasm feels unforgettable, yet indescribable. You cannot forget that it happened, but you cannot perfectly say how. Culturally, the unspeakable secret has led to both celebration and silence. Some traditions embrace orgasm as sacred, a doorway to divine union. Others shroud it in taboo, framing it as something to be hidden. Both extremes reflect the same truth. Orgasm cannot be fully explained, so it becomes symbol instead. Poets call it death and rebirth. Philosophers call it transcendence. Artists depict it in abstraction. None of these are literal, but all of them are attempts to capture the unspeakable. Subjectively, this is why people can read the words of mystics or poets about ecstasy and recognize themselves in them. Even if the language never names sex directly, the ineffable quality links orgasm to other mysteries of life. The unspeakable nature of orgasm also protects its power. If it could be reduced to a formula, if every detail could be described perfectly, it might lose some of its wonder. Part of its intensity comes from its unpredictability, its inability to be rehearsed exactly the same way twice. Even with familiarity, orgasm retains surprise. The body knows what is coming, but the mind never quite does. The failure of language preserves this unpredictability, ensuring that orgasm feels new each time. Subjectively, this means that even long after the first climax, decades into sexual life, orgasm resists becoming routine. It remains a mystery dressed in familiarity, a secret kept even from the self. Evolution may have built this ineffability on purpose. By making orgasm unforgettable but indescribable, biology ensured that it would remain sought after, repeated, and deeply personal. If it could be explained perfectly, perhaps its novelty would fade. Instead, each experience must be lived, not told. Desire drives repetition not because the memory is clear, but because it is incomplete, leaving the body craving the feeling again. This is how reproduction was guaranteed, by giving humanity a peak so powerful it could never be fully translated, only pursued. The unspeakable secret was nature's way of making sure the pursuit never stopped. Clinically, the difficulty of describing orgasm is one of the reasons sexual medicine relies so heavily on subjective reports. Doctors and researchers can measure hormones, blood flow, and contractions, but they still must ask patients, how did it feel? The answers are always varied, always partial. Some say sharp, others say rolling, some say diffuse, others say centered. No single vocabulary exists that satisfies all. This subjectivity is not weakness, but truth. Orgasm is lived in the first person, and no third-person account can fully replace it. Subjectively, this means that the only real definition of orgasm is the one you know in your body. And so we arrive at the unspeakable secret. Orgasm is universal yet unique, measurable yet ineffable, physical yet transcendent. It resists perfect description because it is not only one thing. It is contractions, hormones, brain activity. It is sighs, moans, laughter, and tears. It is glow, aftershock, serenity, and exhaustion. It is intimacy, catharsis, transcendence, and renewal. Each word captures a facet, but misses the gem. The whole is larger than its parts, and the whole cannot be perfectly named. Subjectively, this is why orgasm feels like a mystery even after it is familiar. Like a secret, even when shared. Like something too large for language, but too powerful to forget. Sex feels so good because orgasm is more than biology. It is an unspeakable secret carried in the body, revealed in moments of surrender, and impossible to trap in words. It feels like ecstasy, but no description is ever complete. It feels like transcendence, but no metaphor suffices. It feels like something you know, but cannot tell, like something you live, but cannot fully share. To ask what orgasm feels like is to encounter this paradox, the truth that science can map and culture can celebrate, but only the body can truly know. The unspeakable secret is not failure, but gift. It is what makes orgasm remain extraordinary, what makes sex more than function, what makes pleasure one of the deepest mysteries of human life.